Here we are. I do believe we are all the way live. Welcome, everybody, to yet another Break the Rules stream. I am your very humble host, extremely humble host, Lev Polyakov, Lev Po on Twitter. Giovanni Panicietti is here, as always. Pineal Colada, Daniel Pinchbeck, Owen Cyclops. This is going to be one for the ages. I'm very excited to have everybody here talking about psychedelics, the world of psychedelics. I mean, Daniel and I go back several years. We had an event at the National Arts Club. We know many of the same people from around the Burning Man sphere. And Owen, I've met pretty recently. Pineal Colada, I've met even more recently. But as far as talking about psychedelics goes, I would love to definitely start off with Daniel. And for those who don't know about Daniel, he's an American author, books including Breaking Open the Head, Psychedelic Journey into the Heart of Contemporary Shamanism, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, and he is the co-founder of the web magazine Reality Sandwich.
I
And of the
also have
website...
his
Yes,
book right next to me, Notes from the Edges of Time, from the Edge Time. Yeah, it's a good collection of short essays that you could eat them like cookies. So yeah.
nice, excellent. And Owen Cyclops, I just want to quickly say he's an amazing artist, and I'm going to post the links to everybody's stuff as the chat gets going for those who are not familiar with anybody here. But anyway, let's start off with Daniel. Daniel, what would you say for you personally is one of the most important things, the most important impacts that psychedelics have had in the world?
That's an interesting question. In the world, well, I mean, we know that they've been sort of like instigated a lot of breakthroughs, in science and technology, like the internet and so on. If you read what the Dormouse said, we know that a lot of the pioneers of the internet were taking psychedelics, and that gave them some of the insights into interconnectivity and so on. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, I guess, I mean, we know the psychedelic culture of the 60s, the late Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, that was all informed by psychedelics. And great, literature and art, whether it was Artaud's book, The Peyote Dance, or Huxley's kind of Doors of Perception. But I think all in all, the main value of them is to give people in the modern Western sort of scientific materialist worldview. One value of them is to give them a different, access to other ways of understanding the nature of reality. Open a door, a crack in the kind of sealed door of Western rationalism.
And would you also say that for yourself, what would be the most important contribution you personally would like to have in the world of psychedelics?
Well, I mean, I think that, my first book was one of the instigators in the sort of current psychedelic, renaissance. It came out in 2002, Breaking Open the Head. And when I was writing that book, you really couldn't talk about psychedelics in New York or the East Coast literary, media world. They were really frowned on or just ridiculed. And I think the book helped to change perception, and provide the opening for the current psychedelic renaissance. Beyond that, I mean, my big interest is kind of, taking some of the energy that, and sort of, to sort of like, because I think psychedelics are very powerful for deconditioning and opening our minds and so on. And the problem is that, we're facing an ecological Armageddon that could basically end, humanity's existence on the earth or lead to a crash of our civilization. My hope is that, somehow, psychedelics can be used as tools for, thinking and awakening and somehow help us to deal with this emergency.
And would you say that there was having experience with the latter one, but would you say there was a marked difference between the originary like 60s psychedelic movement, if you will, for lack of a better term, and the sort of rebirth of that same new age spirit in the 1990s that you were more of a part of? Do you think that they were characterized by sort of different trends, or was it sort of like a revivalism? Because as Terence McKenna said, it was like the 60s was this failed alchemy, and I guess like the 90s was another kick at the can at that particular moment in time.
Well, I think a big difference with the more recent psychedelic renaissance, I mean, Well, I mean, I guess there's a few differences. Now we're seeing the science coming back, and all these, like Imperial College is showing studies of, like, we can see with people who, brain scans of people on high dose psilocybin or whatever, LSD. But I think one of the big differences is kind of a lot more connection to the indigenous practices. So, like, the influence of, like, ayahuasca shamanism, or it's like we didn't really have a context for them in the '60s, and so, Timothy Leary and Rob Nuss did that book, the psychedelic, experience that was based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. They were kind of grabbing what they could from mystical cultures to try to provide, like, an instant container or context for it. And now, we have a lot more knowledge of these indigenous traditions and how they've been using them for probably thousands of years.
Now, I would like to get to Pineal Colada and then to Owen. Pineal Colada, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? You are a psychedelic artist, and I'm very happy to have you here with us. How were you inspired to do your art? First off, let's start with there.
Okay, and that we can add into the Discord here. Just in 2012, the first time I smoked DMT. Just art exploded out of me the next day.
Oh, your mic's a little bit weird, by the way. Make sure you're speaking closer to it, okay, or it's a little bit fuzzy.
Sure.
There we go.
Just the simple act of doing psychedelics put something out of me that, like, wasn't with me before. I wasn't into art. I didn't make art. I didn't make anything. I wasn't a creator. I was just, like, a consumer. And then it just came all out, and it came out fast and furious. And I've been making art ever since, usually, like, every day, or at least a few times a week. And just, I don't know, I just need to get it out. Yeah, that's me.
Excellent.
And add something to the Discord, but
oh, I could do it for you. Here is your Etsy. Everybody, follow Pineal Colada both on Twitter and on her Etsy right over here. Now,
by follow, you mean buy something on your Etsy?
Yes, buy something. That's right. Now,
us artists, we don't. I mean, it's not that we get money. It's not that we're opposed to getting money, but it's a nice perk.
Yeah, and BTR is not opposed to getting money either, which is why you have to become a patron. Patreon.com/breaktherules. You're getting all kinds of cool stuff. But now let's go to Owen Cyclops. You are also an artist, and you are also somebody who had a psychedelic experience. So
and had a very interesting history with psychedelics.
Yeah. So let's start out with this, because I think this would be very interesting to have you and Daniel kind of talk about this, coming from different generations of psychedelic experience and experiencing different results. So go for it, Owen.
Yeah, well, my background is that, to put it in like a tiny nutshell, is I've always been a pretty spiritual seeker kind of person. That's always been like the main axis that I've been going down, the main like vector in my development, I guess you could say. I'm an artist. That's my main thing that I do. And yeah, long story short, I did the very sort of archetypal, almost like cliche path of, getting into Eastern mysticism, and then, psychedelics, and, getting into shopping the spiritual buffet, I guess you could say. I guess I have a little bit of an atypical perspective, because I did stop doing them eventually. I got pretty into it. I mean, I don't like to like flex about it, because other people have done it more than me or in different capacities. But usually what I say is that I did it about as much as you could without really altering your lifestyle, without joining some sort of, commune or group or something like that. So I did DMT and a bunch of stuff a lot. But eventually my spiritual path led me away from that. And it's interesting you framed it in terms of like different generations. That's an interesting framing, because for me, I feel like I almost can't imagine the world that you initially described, Daniel, where it's like, you can't talk about it. I'm sure that was the case. But for me, when I was coming up, it was sort of the opposite. It was almost like, this is what everyone's doing. This is like the thing for sure. And I guess I'm a little bit reactionary against it, almost in a way, because I do feel like there is this almost nefarious counter effect, or there are these unforeseen consequences that I think are going to happen as it becomes way more mainstream, and we see like Lindsay Lohan talking about doing ayahuasca on like Vice News. For me, I'm kind of like, whoa, I think this is going to have some negative effects, and there's this underside to it that I kind of picked up on. and then I sort of stopped doing them. Yeah.
I totally agree with you, to be honest. I slowed down tremendously. I definitely noticed that they had, over time, some negative effects on my character. And I feel you totally agree with you. There's a whole shadow side that the psychedelic movement, mostly isn't really dealing with right now. I mean, there's been such a rush, to get them, re-accepted in the mainstream and perhaps legalized. And now there's a huge, capitalism gold rush around it. But yeah, there's a lot of things to ask about. I mean, one idea would be, if you believe there are kind of, super sensible entities, astral entities connected to these experiences, with all these people having unprotected psychedelic experiences, without any kind of, shaman or lineage, and festivals and so on, are they actually sort of, unknowingly kind of eroding the boundary between the psychic and the physical planes? So I think that's one thing to worry about, among other things.
Almost like a schizoanalysis sort of thing, but not as romantic as people make it out to be. And our good friend Zero H.P. Lovecraft, good writer in the chat, great writer, says that I'm here for Owen's explication of the UFOs equals psychedelics equals demon connection. So we could probably talk about that dissolving of boundaries. But that's an interesting topic, Daniel, is because I wanted to get into that a bit about how this sort of paradigm of capitalist realism is now starting to turn its eye towards like using, I think, the framework of like this medicalization around psychedelia, that now it can be a therapeutic device for like Silicon Valley coders. It seems that Californian ideology meshed with the psychedelic movement, and now it's that emancipatory project of it where, I don't know, we could give world leaders psychedelics or something like that. It seems, I mean, maybe it's just me being cynical, but I'm starting to see these connections where we're seeing this reterritorialization of it. Now it's no longer this paradigm where you're oppressing it, where it's bad, but now we're starting to see like the culture industry and capitalism itself take these suspensions of consciousness and use it to their advantage. Like microdosing, for example, is all the rage among Silicon Valley. So I wonder, from a critical approach, what you, and I know me and Owen, we've talked about this, but what do you think of that? Like, do you think there's still a hope for some kind of like entheogenic idealism, if you will?
And also, Pineal, make sure that this Discord is not on, because the volume, I think it's causing the alarms to go off. But anyway, yes, Daniel, go for it.
Well, I mean, Gio, I'm sure you're aware that like hundreds of millions of dollars are pouring into, hundreds of companies are starting up, kind of based on, based on what happened with marijuana, obviously. But some of these companies are started by, major investors, or like the PayPal mafia, like Peter Thiel, Silicon Valley funds and so on. And some of them are trying to patent molecules for treatments, and also patent different treatment modalities. Even like apparently Compass has been awarded, at least for the time being, patents in like, using like soft furniture and I don't know what exactly, but with the attempt is going to be to create something like an Amazon or Uber of psychedelics. That kind of is designing defining the setting for everybody. And they're also looking aggressively for molecules that, for instance, don't have a difficult side to them. They're easier for people. So that's sort of like very Brave New World. You have this like turbocharged,
Soma,
financial capitalist elite looking for kind of Soma, exactly. So I don't know. I mean. I guess my personal hope had been that I wrote a book in 2017 called How Soon Is Now, which tried to offer like a system design approach to the ecological emergency. My hope was that the psychedelics would lead to something more like an anarchist revolution, where people would recognize the sovereign nature of our individuality. But instead, it looks like they're being, assimilated into the, amorphous capitalist machinery.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, assimilation is one part of it. The other part of it, which Owen talked about earlier on, and people were bringing up people like Seraphim Rose, for example, talking about certain negative effects of these entities. And again, I personally don't know if these entities are real, if they're not real. But Owen, can you talk a little bit about that side of it? And do you see that also coming together with this side of it having to do with capitalism that Daniel was talking about?
Also, are the machine elves demons, Owen? Are they demons?
Yeah, well, I guess when I kind of like introduced myself, I played it like that's kind of like half the story, I guess. I don't know, it's like introduce yourself, tell me about your entire worldview, because you guys kind of touched on it. For me, one thing that I think is really interesting, and it's kind of where I usually start the conversation with other people, is that what I came to realize eventually was that taking meaning from the psychedelic experience inherently involves positing something about what it is and what these entities are and how it happens. An example I usually use is I went to a peyote ceremony once, and I was talking to a girl, and she said, yeah, last time I did peyote, I looked into this fire and I saw my dead brother. My brother died, unfortunately. And I looked into the fire and I saw him there, and he was looking back at me, and he told me all this stuff. And she didn't say this, but she's like, it was really crazy, obviously. And that always really stuck with me, because for me, what you think that is affects the meaning you're going to take away from that. Is it like actually her brother talking to her? And then you have to build this larger framework of like, well, I guess the dead are hanging out waiting for us to do peyote so they can talk to us. Or is it like source consciousness? Is it like this new age kind of like energy manifesting as her brother? And like, what does that mean? Or maybe you're like, well, it's a trickster deity. It's like a demon or something tricking you. And then that involves the whole thing. Or maybe it's just a hallucination, that involves the whole thing. So my point is that I started to realize that doing it and trying to take meaning from the experience couldn't be decoupled from building a larger worldview. Not to like go on and on, but some people maybe know, some people don't, but like within theology and within like religious studies, there's something called systemic theology, where you basically start at square one and you're like, let's build the whole system cohesively and see what the whole deal is. And I almost feel like doing psychedelics a lot entails doing that, whether you realize it or not. Over time, you sort of do have to come to conclusions about what these things are and explain it. And a big part of it all for me, not to go on and on, but just to wrap it up, a big part of it all for me was, I'd go to I went to an ayahuasca retreat one time, and we're sitting in this sweat lodge afterwards. And one girl's like, yeah, when I was on ayahuasca, I saw Avalokiteshvara, this 1,000-armed deity of compassion came to talk to me. And then the next person is like, well, I saw, Fatima, I saw Muhammad's daughter, this like Muslim kind of prophetess woman appeared to me. And then the shaman's like, yeah, one time I took ayahuasca and I saw Jesus, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, but how do I piece all of that information together? How does that all fit together into a cohesive story? Because a lot of these things that are happening to people involve like contradictory claims and stuff. So eventually I started to become more skeptical of the experience itself, and my worldview sort of shifted a lot then. I've kind of gone on long enough about that. But I think that that's a big part of what you're asking. Like, Daniel was saying, oh, I thought it would, start this particular kind of revolution or this change. And then we're saying, well, these companies are using it to make their drones more efficient. So it's interesting because I almost feel like at the end of the day, you can use them as tools to do different functions based on the framing that you're putting over it. But that doesn't mean that they're worldview neutral. I do have explanations, I think, that explain the whole experience. But at the same time, I recognize that some atheist at like the Apple factory could take a bunch of acid and be like, wow, we should make 1 trillion iPods and give everyone an iPod,
But that's, I think, the political salience of it as well as something too, because let's face it, the vast majority of psychedelic politics ostensibly comes from like, there is this weird moment where the New Left sort of took it in its corpus. But then, when you look at history, there's a lot of like very, far right, borderline fascistic groups who have like done psychedelics. Like, even figures like Julius Evola have like done some things. And I think that people have a utopian ideal around them, but it's whether, I think, like you said, even just doing them entails a certain mode of being open to certain experiences or a certain worldview. But that being said, where does it go from there in terms of talking about a mass political project for most people, because even like people that came later, like, I mean, I mentioned Terence McKenna, he was very critical of the Timothy Leary project. Well, you know, let's make barrels of LSD and put it in the drinking water. I mean,
yeah.
So
just to clarify, I used to be almost like a devotee of Terence McKenna. I mean, I've listened to probably all the audio I could ever find of him, like multiple times. So I used to be really, really, really down with that. But yeah, and I guess the other flip is that I think that it also involves an element of recognizing that we can be deceived and what the ramifications of that are. Someone asked about Seraphim Rose. I'm sure we'll maybe talk about that later, but I think there's also
still have my McKenna poster. The pink square in the background is him.
Well, Daniel, as far as deception goes, and even to rewind a bit back, as far as the initial question that Owen asked, how can I reconcile all of these different visions that people are seeing under psychedelics? What would be your answer?
Well, I mean, my answer is written in my books. I mean, Breaking Open the Head and 2012 were very much attempts to do just that, and it's hard to like unpack them in a paragraph or two. But I think, I mean, Jung's ideas about there being archetypes in the collective unconscious are helpful. And then he later on, sort of admitted that, those archetypes were not really that different than kind of, what traditions talk about as spirits. I mean, I think Jung and also Rudolf Steiner were kind of like, the great thinkers of the 20th century, kind of like repositioning the shamanic kind of animistic worldview, the ancients for the modern psyche in a way. Yeah, I mean, it feels to me that there are actually all sorts of forces, in the collective unconscious or in the, whatever dimensions there are. And you actually can have interactions with them, and those interactions can have consequence in different ways, good and bad. So I think we don't really know what we're doing yet, and that's a problem, But it's also where just where we're at as a species and as a society right now. I mean, clearly, I guess my perspective would be that these plants are, actively engaged with us, that they also have, an agenda if they have an intelligence or consciousness behind them. And, they're choosing to engage with us at this very complicated time where we're creating technologies that could basically eviscerate our, capacity to continue on the planet and so on. So, I don't know. I mean, there's lots of strength there.
I wanted to get to Pineal and then to also introduce Alexandra Plotnik. Welcome back. But also, as far as Owen goes, I would be very curious if you could think a little bit about what would you say would be the biggest disagreement you would have in terms of worldview, something that could be, let's say, needed with the knuckle, so to speak, to kind of relax that muscle that's still around even after you and Daniel have agreed, I think, on a lot of things right now. So what would be like the crux of the biggest disagreement? But while you're thinking about that, I want to get to Pineal Colada. What do you think so far of the discussion as far as what Owen and Daniel were talking about?
Yeah, I would like to know if plants had some sort of worldwide agenda and they're fulfilling it very shortly, and where that's going to take us and what that's going to look like. I think it's really interesting that Daniel's been studying this stuff for 20 plus years, and yeah, in the past few years it is mainstream now and it's exploded. That has to feel really weird to be a part of that from the back to the front now. Even just, like I picked up just DMT, like for sale, just to
wow.
Just a vape, just a regular old vape, but with DMT transporting you.
And like really cute packaging and just it's very extreme. And
wow.
Where'd you get that?
Insane. That's insane.
It's
Canadian...
that's like giving a nuke to to a baby monkey.
Right.
So, like humanity just has this power in their hands. I mean, like God.
Yeah, spiritual nukes. So Alexandra, you've also had a psychedelic experience recently, but a therapeutic one.
Okay, so I signed up for intravenous ketamine infusions to treat my PTSD, and it's definitely helped more than any other thing I've done. And I think it's sort of it kind of like freed up a lot of mental energy for me post-treatment. I'm so much more like awake and alive, like, and this is like months afterwards. It's been profoundly affecting, and hopefully the effects will continue, because my current psychiatrist says it'll last about 6 months. The ketamine people said that, like, if I'm lucky, I'll never have to go back. Sort of what I've read online, they say the effects are only supposed to last a couple weeks, but it's definitely been longer than that.
Excellent. And before I get back to Owen, I just want to say for everybody, don't forget to sneed us super chats. Sneed us those super chats, and we will answer the super chats. So anyway, Owen Cyclops, I'm very curious and very excited to hear what you have to say about what would be the biggest hurdle, the biggest disagreement that could be looked into closer.
That's a good question. Well, I don't want to like presume what other people think without necessarily knowing, but I don't like to be too contentious. I mean, actually, I kind of do. But I guess in general, the biggest difference I have with probably most people is that I don't think the overall effect of all this is going to be positive. That would be one angle. And I think the other angle would be that I actually do think that, we were just talking about like, oh, if the plants like have an intelligence and stuff like that, I do think that's the case in a very particular sense, but ultimately I do think it's hooked into something that is malevolent, honestly, not to like sugarcoat it, but I do think that. I don't think that, well, within my worldview, everyone has their own worldview. It's pretty hard for me to build a framework where they're not hooked into some larger force that's going to have like a negative effect. I'll put it that way.
But also, do you think that even this sort of quest for sort of a total reconciliation with these plants, I mean, maybe, I know it's like terribly uncouth to say, especially in those circles, but maybe it's the case that not everyone can, and we talked about this the other stream, maybe not everyone can like become a shaman. Maybe it's sort of like these tools in other people's hands that are not meant for them. I mean, who knows what's going to happen?
Well,
right?
the shamanism thing is actually a really good node, because I really had my perspective of shamanism flipped slowly over time also. Initially, I really did see it as this almost like gold-coated relic of like the origin of religion, and I saw religion itself as kind of downstream from shamanism, almost like religion is like a corruption of shamanism, and like, oh, a priest is kind of like a shaman, but he just doesn't have like the magic tools anymore. But eventually it almost sort of became the opposite for me, where I feel like organized religion is more of like the true expression of that. And then where we see shamanism, I don't want to characterize it negatively inherently, but there's a break for me there. I think the people I was around, at least, I can't speak for anyone else, I think that we look at a lot of shamans and shamanic cultures and see them kind of as, oh, these people are trying to gather like spiritual knowledge and wisdom like I am, like in my bedroom. Like I do mushrooms in my bedroom. That's kind of like this Jivaro shaman in the Amazon when he does ayahuasca, right? Like we're both kind of, but the more I looked into it, the more I felt like that connect was not exactly the way it is, if you know what I'm saying. I started to have that break also.
Well, Daniel, I'm curious what you think as far as Owen's statements about this being much more malevolent, and you did say that there is an aspect of it that has malevolence in it. Owen seems to be leaning on it being much more malevolent than not, and also leaning on organized religion as being more of a, unironically a savior to this whole process.
I totally disagree. I think it's a silly perspective. Essentially, yeah, we know that originally there was kind of initiation was the model for like the mysteries of Eleusis, the ancient world, mystery traditions, and the Roman Empire kind of like combined with a certain form of Christianity, shaped the canonical Gospels in a certain way to create a hierarchical system where the Gnostic gospel says, open the door for yourself, and you don't know what is. It's quite likely there was a, mushroom cult in early Christianity that was based around direct experience of the divine, potentially using entheogens as one avenue, maybe other avenues also. But instead it became a hierarchical control system that led directly into, the sort of capitalist technocracy that we have today, which is about, controlling people's consciousness, controlling, the knowledge.
People's attention.
What's that?
People's attention is huge. The control of people's attentions, how humans pay attention, what they pay attention to. The market for that is massive.
Yeah, and even just the whole worldview that you're allowed to have, So I really love the idea that, so and I think that, when I look at my own life, not that psychedelics solved everything, but it's much more exciting to now be in a universe that has many dimensions and many forms of different realities and spiritual planes, and I think that's like 5-MeO DMT from the bufo frog, or the synthetic version, is a way you can have a direct experience of what Buddhism talks about as nirvana, or the void, where there's no ego, it's just pure non-duality. So I think used properly, given the proper context, these are incredible tools for knowledge, and I think the plants have a positive agenda. In terms of they're plants. I mean, they're long-living species that are symbiotes and have figured out how to evolve with this Gaian mind, this Gaian intelligence. So yeah, I find that Owen's perspective seems very, very flawed to me.
Well, I want to dig in this a little bit more with Owen.
I would love to respond to that. I would love to
go for it.
Well, the thing is that there's a lot to unpack there, but I find that there's a lot of give-ins, and I feel like each one, for me personally, kind of crumbles under scrutiny. I mean, to be honest with you,
it sounds like you just had some bad trips, my friend.
Actually, the thing is, I've never had a bad trip. But I'll respond to what you said, though, because the thing is, for example, like there's a lot of sort of, I mean, you use the word silly, so I guess I'll just be like totally honest. You use a lot of these like meme terms that seem to carry a lot of weight, but for example, like appealing to, well, organized religion is hierarchical. Well, the thing is, shamanism is also hierarchical. Those cultures are hierarchical for sure. If we go to the Amazon and find the Shipibo doing ayahuasca, they have an extremely hierarchical society. So
that's a really good point.
It's not actually true. I mean, you can't actually generalize because there's lots of different Amazonian cultures, and I've worked with some like the Sequoia who really are non-hierarchical.
There's non-hierarchical Christian groups too. There's non-hierarchical and hierarchical groups for every.
Yeah, but they're heretical, Owen. So don't worry about it. No,
but what I'm saying though is that like you could do the same thing for every side. I mean, we could find any group anywhere. We could say like, oh, there's these Sufi Muslims and they're not hierarchical. We could. So
yeah, the Sufis are a lot closer to the psychedelic perception.
But I think the problem, the one. Sorry, I cut you off, Owen. I'm very sorry.
Well, yeah, I guess that would be the other main thing. I mean, there's like a bunch of things, but I think that the presupposition that they're closer to the psychedelic worldview because I have presupposed that taking psychedelics is a genuine experience of the divine is an extremely large presupposition, and I don't think that you can really maintain that. You have to cut a lot of stuff out. I mean, to presuppose that, well, this mystical group is kind of psychedelic-y because psychedelics are a real experience of the divine. I mean, what about when my friend takes psychedelics and has a completely delusional experience?
Yeah, well, that can happen also, for sure.
But I think the criticism I would have is that, and I know this will come off as like, more closely aligned to, I would say, post-colonial studies, and there has been discourse with that in terms of Western psychedelic tourism. I think that every culture has its own specific contextualization of their own rituals and their own worldview. And so I feel that a lot of this universalism present within the psychedelic experience isn't really there because, I mean, to just really like make a long story short, the idea of like, I don't know, hipsters from the West, like going to the Amazon and having like shaman tours. I mean, to me, I feel like not having the proper cultural or even ethnic or spiritual context leads to a lot of these sort of funny notions about them. And perhaps maybe this need to give the world this gift is in a way a hindrance to those experiences. right? So, and there definitely is, I mean, people in post-colonial studies who are critiquing like this, the literature that has come out of like the 60s and the 90s, and even like recently in the 2010s when, you know, people like millennials started listening to Terrence McKenna on YouTube, right? I mean, there is a viable criticism to say that these things have a context deeper than just, you know, someone's individual experience. So.
Well, there is a certain hierarchy in a lot of organized religions that, let's say, something that Owen would appreciate in them is that they would, let's say, give the masses of people a sort of grounding, where there's this tradition that's going back, you know, thousands of years, and this is something that they could rely on. But with Daniel's perspective, if I understand it correctly, you are somebody who was able to get a lot out of the psychedelic experience as an individual person to explore as you wanted to. Would it be fair, Owen, to say that one of your concerns would not be so much for explorers like Daniel, but for regular people, that they wouldn't go on, let's say, the wrong path if they're not, you know, in some kind of a very standard, like, bedrock system of how to behave, where their, let's say, naivete can lead them astray? Would that be a concern that you have? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that seems to be something that may be brought up.
Well, yeah, just to be clear, I'm not necessarily appealing to hierarchy as inherently good. I'm just saying that if the critique is, well, look at this system, it's hierarchical, that's not inherently bad, if you get what I'm saying.
No, of course not.
Yeah, so
some of the best things in the world are based on hierarchical structures, because it's organizational, and then, you know, if you know your place in the hierarchy, then you can better, you know, perform in your prescribed role. I think things only kind of get bad when a hierarchy isn't a mediocrity. What is it?
Meritocracy.
Meritocracy, thank you. When you can't rise up in the hierarchy based on your capacities.
It could be bad or good, yeah,
or
for sure.
seniority, you know?
Yeah.
If it's meant to, like, bring people down.
Well, that is a concern that people do have about organized religions. I mean, I think, Daniel, you may agree with me here, that throughout the ages, they have also been used to, you know, even though people may say one thing according to the gospel, they're humans at the end of the day, and they're going to act like humans, and they're going to screw up the lives of people that they happen to be against, whether it's some neighbor they don't like or anything of that nature. So I can't expect a lot of these people to act as Jesus did. I would expect them to act like humans do. And I don't know, Daniel, if that would be something that would also concern you about organized religions. And but do you also see Owen's point as far as certain dangers in relation to having too much freedom? Or do you imagine that there's no such thing as too much freedom, and that people should kind of like explore their own path, and there is not much of a need to have as solid of a hierarchy as we used to?
All right, there's a lot of stuff there. Well, I mean, you know, yeah, I definitely think that these big organized religions have, you know, been very destructive, you know, forces on you know, humanity, and you know, whether it's the, you know, Muslims or the Christians or, you know, Judaism. I mean, you know, they tend to constrict people in these, like, you know, outdated, ossified systems and so on. But they also have beauties, of course, you know, but I mean, I don't think they're working out as being, you know, for the best of everybody. And in terms of too much freedom, I think we're in a, you know, experimental phase. I mean, I think the 60s were the beginning of an initiatory journey for modern Western psyche that, you know, had lost touch with the, you know, visionary dimension, the intuitive dimensions, you know, magic, alchemy, you know, the left-hand path, all this stuff. And, you know, the visionary plants and psychedelic compounds are one of the main ways that that's come roaring back, you know, into this, you know, kind of shared consensus reality. And, you know, I think that it's an ongoing process. Like, we're still in the midst of it, you know. So at the moment, it's a chaotic process, you know, depending, you know, what happens over the next 100 years. You know, maybe new structures will form that will make sense, that will, you know, containers. You know, it could be schools, it could be mystery schools, it could be institutions for consciousness research, you know, it could be Hogwarts for adults, you know, who the hell knows? But, you know,
Yay, I want to go to magic school.
Oh, man.
Mushrooms 101, ayahuasca, second year again.
there's a,
You have to trip your balls off in order to graduate. I would fucking love that.
The dark
by
arts
the way,
teacher would be Julius Evola. So.
Well, for the record, I'm actually like, I don't do drugs anymore. I really don't. They do nothing for me. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm straight edge because I'll like, I don't know, I'll have a wine spritzer like once a month, but yeah.
Nice. And Owen, what would be your response to what Daniel said?
Yeah, well, the thing is that I don't want like what I'm saying to be like misconstrued. Like, I guess part of what I think was illumined to me as I went further on, and I think is lurking almost like a Trojan horse in most discussions of psychedelics, is that people tend to think that they are a little bit more worldview neutral than they are. So it's easy to point at a different system that is like systematized and laid out. But the thing is, even saying something like, well, the Romans and the Greeks were doing this thing in Eleusis, and we're a continuation of that tradition, and the plans get us in touch with this guy in mind, and they're going to help us solve this larger crisis of, mental, physical interaction in the universe. Like, that involves just as much of a worldview as someone who says, I'm a Pentecostal Christian who believes in the Bible. Saying like, well,
but Owen, do you think that potentially psychedelics, I mean, Daniel's done extensive work in this. Do you think that perhaps if people tuned out a bit, they would realize the limitations of like consumer, commodity fetishized consumer capitalism and this like relenting need for like material growth that has doomed us supposedly as a species and has doomed the world? Or do you think that there's a way of like taking these other traditions and plugging them, you know what I mean, like integrating them, like could there, I mean, I know me and you, we've explored some other people in this area that are a bit more radical, but
well, for me, I mean, there is a certain epistemological horizon where I don't want to say everyone in this group is like this, because if someone said that to me, I would feel like that's unfair. But in general, I really am at this point where I kind of feel like this picture that's generally painted of psychedelics, I really have to ask myself, how much of this is just imagined and a myth? I mean, I know a lot of people that have done psychedelics, and even me, and it's really hard for me to pinpoint how many of these people have really been made better, more moral people by this experience. Like, we have this idea that people will do them and then they'll become more, ecologically conscious and more spiritually conscious, and they'll care more about these important causes. But when I actually look out in the real world and think about my own experience with people doing them, I mean, you could just say, well, this is the people but I really don't know if that's really the case. And I wonder how much we're setting ourselves up for almost like Timothy Leary 2, where we're like, yeah, I mean, if more people do this, they'll finally get it. And I'm kind of sitting here like, we kind of tried that, and I feel like it didn't work.
No,
and
I mean,
wonder
think of the
if
Manson family.
Yeah.
Think about what happened there. There's a lot of the margin of error for introducing psychedelics to different human populations is pretty fucking high, when you're in an altered state, that's a sense of that you're vulnerable. Basically, you're vulnerable to mind control. You're vulnerable to exploitation.
But even still, I mean, that is sort of the mythology that, I mean, there's books like Acid Mind that talk about this. But then, whether the claims of mind control via psychedelics is valid or not, or whether it was just that in itself was a CIA, glow in the dark psyop. I mean, who knows?
Well, to play devil's advocate, like Daniel, if you were to play devil's advocate for Owen's position, what would you say would be the most disturbing thing, the thing that he would never want to happen in the world in the next, let's say, several decades? How would it look like if it were to come to fruition?
Well, I don't have an answer to that, but I mean, I think that Owen is also, I mean, ignoring, the fact that, we're having all of these evidence-based studies around the benefit of psychedelics, particularly when they're done, with, therapy context or so on. I mean, so, I mean, actually the science, doesn't agree with him. I mean, so for instance, they gave psilocybin to a bunch of, kind of volunteers who'd never had a psychedelic experience in their lives. I think this was the Johns Hopkins study, and they measured them with a bunch of psychedelic, psychological kind of tests, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, even 5 years after, and they were able to see changes, in their psychological makeup that were positive. So, for instance, and most of them remembered, the ones who hadn't gotten the placebo, who had gotten the psilocybin, remembered the experience as being one of the most important and profound of their lives, on the same level as the birth of their first child or their marriage, or whatever. And also, so there were different factors that usually, as you become an adult, you become kind of stable in these different psychological factors. One of them being your amount of openness to new experience. So it was found even many years after this one psilocybin trip, they remain much more open and positive to new experiences and novelty.
Well, I think
so there is what's that?
Sorry, if we're talking about like different people's sort of susceptibility to being like a shaman versus not a shaman, already having it, like if you're already high in an openness to with the openness to experience quadrant in your personality, I think that's a huge contributing factor to whether or not like you're like.
Well, these were just normal volunteers, and they had a permanent, positive, and you can look this up. Johns Hopkins, you can look at all the studies that MAPS are doing, studies on ayahuasca for depression, for bulimia, for psilocybin for obsessive compulsive disorder. I mean, the evidence is gigantic that these things are having a super positive benefit. Yes, and they're tools, like any tool, like a hammer. You can smash your thumb with it, or you can build a house. And I definitely, as I said at the beginning, have seen it go wrong. Even for myself and other people at times. But I do see a lot of people evolving through the use of these substances. It's not perfect, maybe they get to a new stasis point where they're, burning, they went from being corporate lawyers to like, Burning Man, crypto, investors or something. But, there does seem to be a continuum there. But I have a friend who has a company called Entrepreneurial Awakening. And for a long time, he's been bringing, CEOs of tech startups and so on to Peru to go through, ayahuasca, followed by integration counseling. And many of them have, were fairly grateful to have the experience, but also some of them actually changed what they were doing. There was one guy who was like running a soft drink company, and he was like, no, I can't do that anymore. So when he came back, he went more into herbal, nutraceuticals, tried to do things that he felt were better for human health. And that to me is pretty common. I've seen a lot of people actually change their how they invest their money, or what they see as important, or how they eat, or how they live, usually in good directions. Not so much with LSD, all of that too, but particularly with ayahuasca and psilocybin and, peyote and so on.
But again,
I do have a response to that. I would love to respond to that. Sorry,
before Owen, I would say that, actually you go on. I was just going to say that it does. But wow.
But it does sound pretty positive. I gotta say, just until I get to Owen's response, I gotta say, Daniel, that sounds like pretty good.
It's rearranging.
Well, you can look at reams
of capitalism.
Reams and reams of scientific evidence at this point. I mean, you can go to MAPS.org, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're also doing the studies on MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder. They're working with Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans who had treatment averse forms of PTSD. So many things have been tried and failed with them. And they're finding that 3 sessions of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy has more than a 60% cure rate for the treatment averse PTSD. There's also a very interesting movie called From Shock to Awe, which shows a bunch of Iraq war veterans who go down to Florida and work with ayahuasca, and they get clear of their PTSD, and they throw away all these stupid pills that they were taking, all these things that didn't work. So, I think, the evidence is really quite strong that
Well, it does seem to be better than the mind pills in that sense, and so I'm curious, like, what would be your response to that?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't sound bad.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that my response to that, it's sort of twofold. I mean, on the one hand, there are people like the veterans who, have PTSD and take MDMA. I know that you know this, obviously, so I don't want to feel like I'm taking like a cheap shot because you know this, but MDMA isn't technically a psychedelic. So I don't know if I would really group it with everything else here. But people do ayahuasca and things like that also.
That's why I also mentioned From Shock to Awe, a film which you can totally watch, shows these veterans totally getting cured of their PTSD using ayahuasca.
Yeah, so on the one hand, it kind of reminds me when I'm talking to people about, other things, like something like weed, for example, and they'll say like, well, what about these kids that have epilepsy and they get cured with weed? I feel like it is qualitatively different than saying that it's a tool for spiritual knowledge. If someone has something wrong with their brain and they can do this thing and fix it, I feel like the medical and strictly medical application is different than the spiritual searching application of it. Someone could say that's like me splitting hairs.
That's actually not the case, because if you read the reports of people, like for instance, the studies on people who had end of life anxiety, they were suffering from terminal illnesses, they went through psilocybin, and what cured them of the end of life anxiety or lessened it considerably was the mystical experience. So actually,
what's his name, Strassman, and the DMT, the spirit molecule. I think he did some of that work.
That was different. That was totally different. That was that's another kettle fish. I mean, there wasn't really healing aspect, and actually the reason he closed down that work is he began to get the heebie-jeebies around kind of messages he was getting. His wife got cancer. A psychic told him that different spirits were coming into the world through the DMT. So that's a more ambiguous example.
Yeah. So the other thing, which I let off with like a really, really weak point. So I just want to like make sure that I say
all your points are actually pretty weak, to be honest.
Okay. If you want to make it like that, I'm down, man.
That's true.
Okay. Well, so if you want to take it there, the thing is that I think it's really, I don't want to say naive because I don't want to be rude, but if that's what it is, I think it's very naive to think that scientists and people working with raw data and things like that are equipped to evaluate someone's inner life and someone's spiritual life through the lens of what they themselves. Wait, let me say what I'm going to say. You don't know what I'm going to say. Hold on, let me say what I'm going to say. No, I don't think because, for example, if you took someone who, I mean, you could even take anyone you know. If you take someone who smokes a lot of weed and you said, hey, does weed make you happier? Is this improving your life? A lot of them would say yes, even though it's not. So there's a double layer of someone isn't actually always equipped to evaluate how their own life is going and how external factors are affecting that. But more importantly, I've looked at those studies, and you might find a study where it says, well, I'm just going to make one up. We gave these people ayahuasca and 80% of them started believing in God. And 2 years later, they still believe in God. So look at this, look how awesome it is. The thing
why are you making something up? That's just
because I'm not looking at a study in front of me, but studies like that exist. So the point is that when you look at studies
that wasn't actually.
Yeah. Oh, and you got to put a realistic one. You got to bring a realistic study up, though.
Those exist. Things like that exist.
No, but a specific one. It would help for the conversation, right? To have like a specific study that could be referenced.
Let's not get into the weeds about specific.
Okay, I mean, I could pull it up, but my point is that the point stands.
I got the studies, I got the documents.
At a particular, I could pull one up, I guess. But the point is that for things like that, it's not a given. Like I'll use an example you just said, someone being open to new experiences. It's not a given that being open to new experiences is a good thing. A lot of people wreck their life and totally ruin themselves over years by being way too open to new experiences.
So
Likewise,
let me finish. Seriously, it can be a trap.
Yeah, likewise, if you take someone and say, well, we gave them ayahuasca and they started believing in God or started believing in X, Y, and Z concept, those concepts as terms function in terms of a larger worldview. So if you have someone who tells a researcher, yeah, I believe in God now after I took mushrooms, well, what's their conception of God? There are people who think that they're God walking around. How
much longer are you going to go on this?
I'm sorry, dude. I'm totally rebutting what you just said.
No, you're not. What you're saying is totally stupid.
Why is it stupid?
Totally besides the point. Because they've taken these kinds of things into account. I mean, for instance, I think it was Une Vegetalis in Brazil. There was a question of whether it should be legalized, whether ayahuasca should be allowed to be used as a sacrament in religions, and the question that the scientists looked at, when they did research on the population that was using ayahuasca in these religions, was not, did they suddenly believe a bunch of shit? It was it having a good effect on their lives? And they found that the people who were in these religions were better, parents, the men weren't beating their wives. They were doing better in their careers. So by every factor, that one could measure externally, there was actually, improvement. And then also, when
wait, hold on. If you're gonna cut me off, I'll cut you
off. Wait, no. Nobody cut anybody off. Nobody cut anybody off. Daniel, you go.
Scientists, in that way, it's totally stupid, because a lot of the people who are doing these studies are extremely sensitive, extremely intelligent, who, have had the experience themselves. You could just go and look at who's doing it at Imperial College, go do some research. I know, to me, it sounds like you got infected by a very dogmatic perspective where you want to just see everything through this negative lens, which is fine, but it's not very interesting as an actual discussion.
Okay, well, to respond to what you just said, wait, I have to respond to that. So the thing is, if, you know, I don't want to make it a personal thing, but if you look into any group that promotes literally anything from religions to cults to good groups to bad groups, they all demonstrate exactly what you just said. You can go to a Mormon group and find 100 guys who are like, yeah, I was an alcoholic beating my wife, and then I became Mormon, and I stopped doing that. That's not a case for Mormonism. That doesn't mean that Mormonism is true or good. That happens with any belief set or any practice people adopt that's of a spiritual nature. So that's totally discountable.
So Owen, the point is, Owen, that there's nothing from an inner perspective that will change your mind, and there's nothing from an outer perspective that will change your mind.
I think that you need
hold on. Everybody.
You have a belief.
Hold on, please, everybody. I need to speak.
perspective.
I need to speak, everybody, please. Okay, so as the mediator here, what I would propose, and I appreciate everybody doing this, what I would propose is, Daniel, you're talking about these studies in order to know whether it's just some people selecting some things here and there versus something much more tremendous. How many people were tallied all these things? How many people that we can actually look up were tallied to say, okay, these people, they were living, you know, awful lives, they were beating their wives, they were beating their kids, and then they had this transformative experience, and we were able to track this many people through this amount of time, and we noticed that there has been a tremendous effect as far as, you know, there weren't complaints anymore, and everybody was, you know, seeing that they are acting better. Like, can these things be tracked in that very, you know,
but also is
way?
there not a question of like consenting to the very like, you know, scientism, materialistic structures that have for up until relatively recently totally excluded these experiences out of the question? I mean, it seems that this quest to get science to validate inner experiences of the entheogenic nature is almost, in my mind, like defeating the point. And another point would be that in terms of a radical political project, and especially when it comes to the environment, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there was this one clip I was watching in preparation for the stream. I think it was you and Russell Brand, where you were talking about how world leaders taking these drugs and how it could change things. I mean, maybe I'm just too cynical, but I don't see like the Silicon Valley, like tech mogul that goes to the Amazon basin and does ayahuasca. They're suddenly going to work to overthrow the very machinery that's made them into omnipotent people that can control literally the discourse. I mean,
well, there's quite a bit.
Wait, just before we get too far, because we are going down interesting roads, but you know, it doesn't need to be personal, but what's the response to what I just said about the data points? I can find 100 guys.
Yeah,
wait, let me finish. I can find 100 guys who will tell you that they became Catholic and they stopped getting drunk all the time, and they have great wives now, and they had kids, and it's all because of Catholicism. In your worldview, that's not an argument for Catholicism being good or valid or true, is it?
So, Owen, all I'm pointing out is that you've created a way of structuring.
You can't answer my question. You can't answer the question.
No,
because it would dismantle what you're saying.
Owen, please let Daniel respond.
Okay. You've constructed a discourse that is totally like deterministic. You know, so if I say that, you know, the inner experience was reported on as being positive, if I say that people reported on their happiness being higher, if I say that people felt that their openness to new experience was a positive thing, you have a reason to put that down.
I'm not putting it down. I'm saying every group has that.
Let me finish my fucking point.
Yeah, let him finish.
I'm gonna fucking get off this fucking boring fucking conversation. All right.
Hey guys, as somebody with actual diagnosed PTSD, when you guys argue and shit, like it actually triggers that, like for real. I will throw up on stream.
Yeah, guys, there is no reason to argue here. I mean, look, at the end of the day, who cares if we're thinking? Who cares if we're thinking about these in a different way? Like Daniel, Owen, I really don't give a shit that there's like disagreements between how you see these things.
Let's just go on. Let's go on to these other subjects that Gio just raised, and we can forget about this whole.
Well, one last thing that I want to ask you there, Daniel, just for my own personal curiosity, when it comes to the actual statistics, the actual numbers, how many people, from your understanding,
do you think that I'm a statistician? Do you think that I'm sitting around as a scientist?
Well, more or less like looking at these things.
The government of Brazil, which was against using ayahuasca, allowing people to use it as a sacrament, then made it legal for these different religions to use it after a huge amount of data was compiled. If you want to go back and look at that, feel free to do that. I don't have time for it, but we did explore it a little bit in a book, When Plants Dream, that I wrote with an anthropologist about the history of ayahuasca.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's kind of what I was looking for, that it is like a very significant, large amount of data, and that's important to have. I'm definitely with you there, Daniel.
But let's get away from the data points experience. I think maybe we should go on to other
Yes.
Somebody in the chat is accusing me of not being able to handle the heat.
Yeah, but
True.
the chat.
No,
Yeah, but don't worry, the chat loves you,
I'll
Alexander.
stay
Don't
in
worry.
the chat.
They think
But-
you are BTR's quirked up shoddy, so don't worry about it. Well, what was I talking about? Something about capitalism? Oh yeah, so the guy in mind. Okay, so we have this sort of mechanism or social technology that allows for what would you say, integration into ecological consciousness. What will be the next sort of step as to bring that to these greater systems that are, really doing damage to just the sustainability of our planet as a whole, I guess you could say. Like how does the micro translate to the macro, in other words?
I mean, I wish I knew, Gio. I mean, if I was to lay odds in it, I would say that, we're going to see some serious breakdowns. I mean, if we look at what's happening, like the Amazon rainforest, according to scientists, is now, emitting carbon rather than sequestering it, and is on the verge
It's
of
on fire.
What's that?
It's on fire. The Amazon is on fire, like almost continuously now. There's barely, like it's a fraction of its original size. We can talk about like, ooh, DMT gave me this like ecological consciousness. Well, yeah, and guess what? Like the ecology of the Amazon is almost like completely fucking ruined.
And there's greater
global tragedy, global. I think if anybody like is interested in psychedelics and expansion of consciousness, like preserving what remains of the Amazon should be like a top priority. And that, don't fucking buy anything with palm oil in it. Like you have to be really conscientious of that.
What's with palm oil? Can you read
palm oil?
Palm oil?
So they have
it comes from the trees and they have
yeah. Also beef. If you get a burger from McDonald's, you're contributing to the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. Some of the best things you can do is like be really restrictive in your meat intake, and also avoid palm oil at all costs, because palm oil, they have to basically burn down native wildlife and replace it with palm oil trees, and that's why orangutans are going extinct. So if we really care about expanding humanity's mass consciousness and stuff, like we also have to really concentrate on preserving the natural habitat of these plants and animals.
Yeah, no, Alexander, that's great. I mean, I think the palm oil is actually Indonesia. The big contributor to the Amazon deforestation is soybean plantations for cattle, among other things. So yeah, we're in this place where we don't know our individual actions. Yes, you can stop eating meat or taking palm oil or whatever, but how does that stop this juggernaut of destruction?
Well, I mean, don't call it a juggernaut, because that's a defeatist attitude. It's really about spreading the message and also like providing an example to others. You don't need to like prophesize about like, what my actions are like contribute, but you just do it. You just do it and you don't think about it because it's something. And you can be an activist, you can be whatever you want to be, but like just it's sort of part and parcel with like what's happening. If you want to be an advocate for psychedelic research and psychedelic use, you also need to be very much like aware of the destruction of the Amazon rainforest and all that.
On the note of positive benefits and the research that's going on, I just wanted to add that there's that really interesting one. It's a Vancouver company funding trials in I guess at Imperial. It's giving stroke victims DMT, a microdose of it, 24 to 48 hours after they have a stroke, to like repair the brain as fast as they can and really, heal as fast as they can. And I just found that really fascinating, and I wanted to put it in before, but I don't know how to speak up. So that's me, and I'm good. Thanks.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
is cool.
Yeah, no, the Imperial College stuff is amazing, and there's also some research. David Luke is a really interesting parapsychologist, scientist who's studying kind of psychedelics and psychic phenomena, which I think is a very interesting thing to look at. I just put on the little chat here, Lev, but you can also add it to the big chat. This is this guy contacted me recently who developed a plan for reversing the destruction of the Amazon and saving it. And we did a call with him. I mean, you can have him on your show if you want. We did a call with him, and I think it's a great plan. I mean, part of it is making the indigenous people, giving them sort of stewardship rights over the Amazon. You have to do a retraining program. There's like 25 million people who live in the Amazon basin. A lot of them are working in the extraction industries. There's he did a really interesting job in giving a full spectrum idea of how it could be returned, kind of reversed.
I mean, that's great. I think that these are really positive things that psychedelics can also bring about. But I am curious from like the perspective, let's say in Soviet Russia. My parents were part of the underground, like dissidents, I guess you could say, and there were people in their lives who really got into psychedelics a lot. And again, like these are just personal stories. I'm not saying that this is everybody, but one thing, the perspective that my parents personally had when experiencing the lives of a lot of these people is that they saw it in a way, psychedelics for the people around them, as a spiritual crutch. In a way that they were so used to having this thing that brought them into this place that it's like they were able to get through the door by slamming it with a sledgehammer, as opposed to having it gently open up for them when they themselves have enough of a willpower to be ready to experience it. So my other concern has nothing to do with, medical data or anything like that. It purely has to do with, are human beings foregoing the experience of training their own willpower to get to a certain spiritual state if they're just, prying the door open by the use of another substance?
Yeah, there actually is a really relevant theological concept that I feel like I should mention. Someone mentioned Seraphim Rose before. I think someone brought it up in the chat or something, but it's interesting you mentioned from Russia because there is a concept in Eastern theology, like in Orthodoxy, that we don't really have in Western theology, and it's called prelest.
Prelest, which actually means cuteness. That's another way you could say it, but yeah.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically it is spiritual delusion. It's like false aggrandizement of the ego via spirituality, and it's like a perversion of religion and spirituality. And I think that's an interesting layer to add on to everything else, because I think that on some level we have to recognize that we are humans that have a negative nature. In a way, we have a positive nature and a negative nature, but things that feed our ego, things that make us like, well, I know more about this, I'm this special person, I have access to X, Y, and Z, things that feed our ego are inherently dangerous. So not that that makes it good or bad, but that is something that I think is interesting to be aware of in terms of everything we're talking about.
I mean, I am curious, like, Daniel, do you see this aspect of this prelest, as Owen talked about, being present within the world of psychedelics, and would there be anything to what I just mentioned as far as this prying open effect and not exercising one's willpower, that would have a negative effect down the road? Maybe not even in one life, but maybe in the lives to come, if you believe in reincarnation.
I think there's a lot of good evidence for reincarnation. If you look at the work of somebody like Ian Stevenson, who wrote a book called Professor, wrote a book where biology and reincarnation intersect. We went all around the world looking at early, children who had early life, past life recall of a past life. They would actually bring them back and to the families and so on that they've been part of the past life. But life is challenging and dangerous. Like you go out of the house, you can get hit by a car. I've been living in Tulum. There are cartels, shooting people. And that the fact is, life is short, transitory, fragile, dangerous. And we all have to make choices based on the opportunities we have. Unless we lived in Tibet a couple centuries ago and were monks and had the opportunity to spend our lives trying to reach enlightenment or developing the rainbow body, which maybe a few people are still doing today. We have to take our Gnosticism, our where we can find it. And for the vast majority of people in my world, without psychedelics, without ayahuasca, without DMT, without LSD, without psilocybin, life would have been a much bleaker, more dismal reality, where they would have felt very little access.
See, isn't that the ultimate challenge, though, Daniel? Isn't that the biggest challenge? Like, you are under such heavy weight, it's kind of like lifting, much heavier weights than you would otherwise. Thusly, I think the reward is that much more when you're able to, at least from my personal perspective, naturally go about experiencing these various things. And I've started meditating years ago and all that. So,
like, this argument has been going on forever. And I mean, for a long time, when I was back in the reality sandwich days, the Buddhist community, the meditative community was very against psychedelics. But frankly, when I interacted with the Buddhist community, the meditation community, I didn't really feel they had anything up, or the yoga community on the psychedelic community. I mean, it's different I mean, psychedelics are a hardcore path of initiation, and actually it requires a lot of will to like sit in a peyote ceremony. The peyote, for instance, is all about the will. It's not necessarily having like tremendous visions, but you have to sit straight up and stare at the fire and pray and sing. Ayahuasca also in some ceremonies. So, a lot of these, I mean, the Santo Daime, one of the religions from Brazil, you sing all night, you dance back and forth. I mean, they're actually, in these kind of, shamanic contexts, developing the will is actually part of the practice.
But don't you think like there was cases, I think Owen brought this up last time, where they gave psychedelics to Tibetan monks and they didn't experience, they didn't think as highly of it. Do you think that this sort of this need to go into it to sort of like not necessarily cast aside, but to maybe discredit these much older wisdom traditions such as Vajrayana Buddhism or so forth?
I'm going to say, whoa, time out. I don't discredit. I think Vajrayana Buddhism is absolutely amazing.
But I mean,
we didn't grow up in that context, and most of us are not spending, years having those type of meditative experiences.
And then another point would be just about the it seems that in the West we live a very like individualistic, deracinated, like rootless, like.
What is deracinated? What does deracinated mean? You like to use these big words.
Well, like without context, without roots, we seem to be dislocated from our sense of purpose and history and family. Totally. and but then how then would we reintegrate these rituals and these contexts and these cultures that grew over thousands of years? It seems that that's the quest to bring these into modernity. Or do you think that the way that
I kind of answered this before. I mean, I said that starting in the 50s, 60s, when we rediscovered the entheogens, we've been on a voyage of collective shamanic initiation, as a modern civilization. And it's a new situation. We don't know where it's going. I mean, when you're in initiation, it's a liminal state. It couldn't end up with total destruction. It couldn't end up with an transcendent evolutionary thing happening. So yeah, I mean, it could totally go to hell. I mean, it definitely looks fairly close to hell these days.
And what do you think of collapse? Do you welcome collapse like some kind of Linkola Kaczynskiite, or do you think that collapse is like not something we should avoid? I mean, or is it justice?
I mean, look at my book, How Soon Is Now, which took me like 8 or 9 years to write. I mean, I think that we should come from a position of empathy and compassion, and we know that the ecological catastrophes are disproportionately affecting the poor and the underprivileged, and so the right thing would be for those societies that have have tremendous wealth and excess and privilege like our own. We should be seeking to right the balance. And I mean, in theory, you could resettle. In How Soon Is Now, I found this research that you could resettle the whole population of the Earth in an area the size of Texas, and everybody would have room for like a backyard. Every family would have room for a little backyard, garden. So, the problem is not the amount of resources up till now. I mean, we're still producing more food than the world can eat. It's the inexcessive use of resources, and it's actually the lifestyle of the rich world, the rich 1%, that hog a lot of the resources.
Well, to go back to Russia though for a little bit. This sounds very much like an ideal that a lot of Russians back in the day were thinking, what if this would happen to us? Not just Russians, Germans, and various people were thinking about communism as being this ideal to achieve. And look at what ended up happening. I mean, my biggest concern here has to go back to those pillars of severity and mercy that is found in various mystery schools. And I think a lot of people, especially a lot of people with money to spend who go to Burning Man, engage in psychedelics, that my concern is that they're so far on the pillar of mercy that they are going to be run over by somebody who's going to take advantage of them. Somebody who's going to be very charismatic is going to tell them how we can organize this great new society, and they will just think, well, they're the best thing since sliced bread. Of course we're going to follow them. Like, how do we make sure that people are going to be sober-minded enough not to follow somebody who may come about like that?
You mean the Antichrist?
That
You're
maybe
basically talking about the Antichrist.
I didn't say that, you did.
You just have
but,
like a 666 on their forehead. Duh, it usually glows. Come on.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
what you're describing is part of what I think is like the Trojan horse or dangerous element lurking in a lot of these spiritual systems, because when you put all your chips on an ideal like you're describing, sometimes when you hit reality, it's really, really, really hard. And that's part of what I was getting at before, where when you ask someone about their beliefs or things like that, that they're not necessarily equipped themselves to know how that's going to play out long term. I mean, everyone probably knows someone who's adopted a belief and then it's made their life way better, but sometimes those beliefs aren't true. And when you fall off that horse after X months or a year, sometimes it gets pretty rough.
Of course. I mean, like cognitive dissonance it feels bad. It's not a pleasant experience, but it's necessary one. We all need to experience it in order to grow intellectually and morally and spiritually.
But that's why I'm looking for the middle pillar here. If we are talking about these mystery school pillars, because Daniel, I think it is incredibly important, and I'm absolutely grateful that you are here right now speaking with us. The fact that there is a clash, the fact that there is a disagreement, what could be better than that? Because if we're talking about you being at Burning Man, or me being somewhere else, or Owen being somewhere else, and if we're just talking with the same group of people about the same stuff, everybody's nodding their heads like, yes, that gets boring and it's stupid because nothing gets accomplished at the end of the day. We don't get to grow as people, and I think all of us here are eternal students. I think you're a student, Daniel. I think you're a student, Owen. I'm not going to say anybody here has made it to say
also,
that,
shout
okay,
out to
I know
the chat.
everything.
I hate the Antichrist as well.
Yes. So, but that being said, what would you say, Daniel, would be a good middle pillar here to be able to retain a sense of perspective for people who, may be completely with their heads in the clouds? Like, what would be a good way to go about this, that at the same time people do look forward to creating something better than what came before?
Once again, there's a huge amount to unpack there, and Burning Man itself has many different constituents, including the Silicon Valley, rulers of the universe that Gio mentioned, and still some more kind of like Northern Cali hippies, Canadian, commune dwellers, and so on. But
from Vancouver Island, I'm assuming.
Yeah, what I tried to do in How Soon Is Now was kind of look at the different aspects of the types of changes that would have to happen in terms of the the technical side of it. Like we basically know what we would have to do to deal with the fact that our industrial farming is leaching all of the topsoil of life, and the UN says that in like 60 years we won't have any harvests because the topsoil will be dead.
Also, the bees are dying. Don't forget about that. No more pollinators.
Because of all sorts of reasons, GMOs, maybe even like electrical, satellite systems and so on. But so we know in every area, we would have to go back towards regenerative farming practices on a global scale. We'd have to actually retrain people in large quantities. We'd have to break up the industrial farmings. There's a great documentary called The Biggest Little Farm. It shows this couple from Hollywood who were in the media, and they got sick of the media, and they decided to buy an abandoned kind of industrial farm that was totally dead land. And they worked with a permaculture designer, and in 6 years, the land totally came back to life. Like all the animals and the insects came back, and the whole thing just flourished. So that is feasible, it's possible, but to do that, we would have to retrain, there'd have to be a movement in that direction. Because basically, over the last 2 centuries, this whole ideology of modernism formed with a very one-dimensional idea of progress. So progress means, you have a boring life in the countryside, you move to the city, you have an exciting life, you as an Uber driver, or you work in marketing, or you're Horatio Alger, you try to climb this ladder of success. And we now know that none of that is functioning, right? Like there isn't, Princeton has analyzed that the U.S. is a functional oligarchy now. Money, 93%, 93 cents of every dollar of value created goes to the top, like 1% or less. Mm-hmm. And the billionaires profited, massively, over the last year during this pandemic.
So you think
I'm so happy this is conversation is happening on the street.
So are you in agreement then with people like James Howard Kunstler, who talks about how our way of life? I do think he was talking about this in the Hermetics podcast. By the way, shout out to our friend Meta Nomad.
He's going to be on Sunday with me at the Left Stream, where I'm going to be drawing my NFTs.
He talked about how basically our way of life would change to the point where long-term travel would become improbable, or people would have like the way that people would structure their life around wage slavery essentially would have to change, because people would need an extra amount of time to actually grow their own food, then supplement it with whatever income they have. I feel like that's sort of like almost happy poverty is either by necessity, by some calamity, or I think maybe people would start to voluntarily choose to escape like the big urbanite existence of wage slavery and so forth. But then, I mean, the limitation is always that people, in terms of just skill of actually growing their own food. I mean, that, you know, I have a garden because of course I'm Italian. So
Yeah.
it's,
And you have pigeons as well.
yeah.
You can cook those pigeons later.
Well, we had to get rid of the pigeons because of the hawk in our area, but no, but that's, I mean, I think that's could be a viable solution, but it's just the question of, you know, if there's going to be laws created to limit people from I mean, there is laws that limit people from having their own animals in gardens and so forth. And I mean, I don't know why. Maybe the whole Agenda 2030 thing is.
You're talking about so many things. I'm beginning to lose the thread a little bit.
No, but I guess how would you have a practical approach? I guess you could say to like, would you say that we need a total restructuring of our way of life?
Yeah, we basically need a total restructuring of our way of life, and that's what I kind of looked at and how soon is now. We have to. I mean, you know, it's, you know, Biden is now calling for, you know, more reductions on CO2, you know, which is okay, but actually we need, you know, way more. I mean, the Paris Accords were a travesty, you know, compared to what we're learning about what's happening to the ecosystems of the planet. I mean, the oceans are, you know, I think they're 30% more acidic than they were 40 years ago. The entire body of the ocean, because the oceans absorb something like 50% of the CO2, or something, or, you know, 40 to 60% of the CO2 that we're emitting. We emit 1 million tons of CO2 per hour. That's leading to a breakdown of the coral reefs, which shelter ocean biodiversity. So the whole ocean, you know, ecosystem may just collapse on us. And there's a movie, Seaspiracy, which goes into what's happening to the fish populations and so on.
And we can't replace these things with synthetic structures. We can't. They're just too complex. They're too interrelated. We cannot. Humanity will perish fully.
Well, in the chat, we had a request asking about what do you think of Klaus Schwab's The Great Reset? Have you gotten a chance to take a look at it?
I actually wrote a short book. Well, I didn't really address Schwab so much directly, but yeah, I've been directing it, discussing it in essays on my newsletter. Yeah, I mean, you know, the Great Reset is the technocratic, you know, control elite, kind of the integration of government elites, financial elites, and tech elites, and now biotech also coming together to try to impose a totalitarian control agenda on the human population. You know,
so you're not a fan.
No, I mean, I think that what we need is, you know, decentralization, bioregional, you know, local power, you know, local, you know, alternative, you know, currencies, and I think there's still some hope in blockchain and the crypto world. If we could actually create, you know, alternative mediums of exchange that have different values like embedded in them.
And I honestly think, like, without any, like, regardless of any other disagreements, like, Owen, I think you would agree with Daniel on those points, as well as, like, the small family farm type of an ideal, which I would like to maybe in the future
Owen's
have farm
moved
as well.
From New York to a more rural place, so.
Like, Owen, would you say, like, you would agree with those points that Daniel brought up?
In general, that stuff is good. Yeah, it's kind of far off the topic of psychedelics, but I'm very skeptical of like the power structures actually having people's best interest in mind when they claim to do things addressing like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, but well, Daniel does too. I mean, Daniel, you
said
it.
Well, no, but let Owen finish. I mean, let's maybe. Well, and you have experience with our friend Uncle Ted. So, what would you say? How do you say the future is shaping up in terms of food production and all of these different things, and even just if a conscious revolution is even possible anymore at this point, or if people are going to like even things like blockchain, what do you see going on with that even, or if that is related to what we're talking about generally with expanding our minds and so forth? I mean, there's people that thought that the internet itself was going to be a psychedelic mechanism.
I
mean, yeah, but
no, the internet numbs you out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big question. If you mean consciousness revolution, like from the ground up, people will kind of like figure it out. For me, it always comes back to worldview, because all of these problems and all these situations are always going to be interpreted in terms of a larger worldview. And as much as people go through their own personal growth, I think that what I actually see when I look out my own window is that the dominant worldview is just getting stronger and containing more and more people in it, and making it harder to step outside of it, and making it harder for people to look at their own worldview with like a meta lens. So I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. It's not exactly what you asked me, but for me, yeah. I mean, I don't know how I see the larger worldview that contains all of it changing, and that would be what really has to happen.
Yeah, but the thing we do know about human culture is it can change very quickly. As we just learned from the coronavirus and how quickly people adapt, new behaviors, new understandings. The Industrial Revolution showed us that. We can look at the Marshall Plan in the Second World War. So we do know that human culture is capable of rapid change and adaptation. You would need to have a small, circle, some small circle of people who actually were holding, a new vision for humanity, and then they would have to use traditional tools like media, like art, like storytelling, like music, to propagate like an alternative model, and that could actually be backed up by blockchain-based systems for direct democracy, from the local to the planetary level, as well as ways to exchange value that don't support the military-industrial complex and the fossil fuel industry.
Well, you mentioned art, but maybe we could talk about that as a contentious issue. What do you, I mean, most of us, well, all of us are artists here in some ways, but do you, the role of art and just, I guess, general psychedelic culture is very strong, but I sort of, and I was very influenced by artists like Venosa and Gray and so forth, but do you feel, in general, I'd also love to hear Owen's thoughts in particular, but this sort of the particular style around psychedelic art and art production. I mean, I would like to see everyone's personal experiences, but it seems to me that we've really hit somewhat of a roadblock, because as there is sort of like a cultural acceptance. I mean, Alex Gray doing like 10,000 Days, for instance. I don't know. It seems that it's less of an art form, but it's more of like a, how would you say, a cartography of experience, because a lot of these artists, they'll take these substances and they'll try to paint or create digital imagery that is similar to their experience. And so I wonder if like the same forces of kitsch are like present in like psychedelic art, or if like it truly is like a revolutionary art form that is being produced by the psychedelic experience. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
well, this one was produced by my psychedelic experience.
Yeah, and everybody's psychedelic experience is different. So we can't.
Oh, and also Pineal Colada. Now is the time to promote your work as well. So make sure you go to her store. I'm going to link it right here in the chat. But yeah, that is a good question. I mean,
just linked. I won the Maps Canada 2021 Bicycle Day art contest, and they put my art on the shirt.
Oh,
so
nice.
Cute.
Check that out.
The white looks best.
Great.
Yeah, that is.
You're
beautiful.
also a Leaf, I take it?
Yes.
Oh, but you're out in Alberta. Yeah, I'm in Ontario, unfortunately, but that's...
Gio, when are you coming to New York?
Well, I don't know. When will Doug Ford let me come to New York? That's the question. So,
so anyway, back to the art question.
I don't know if I understood the question.
Well, where do you see the future of psychedelic art? Do you think that it still has sort of a subversive potential in culture?
The future of psychedelic art. Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, I think like, my favorite movie is Holy Mountain, by Jodorowsky.
Gio's too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You met Jodorowsky, didn't you? I watched that back in the day.
Yeah, we did a little documentary together. So yeah, I mean, I think, art in general has it's always very powerful potential to transform consciousness in different ways. So I mean, I'm not quite sure what the question is beyond that. And yeah, I mean, Alex Gray is almost like, he wants to create a church, and there is a kind of like, codifying kind of instinct, in his work. Like he paints sort of almost like painting the relics of the saints. Like he paints like hagiographic portraits of like Albert Hoffman or Shulgin or something. That's just his way of approaching it.
But that brings me to another question that I'm happy you ignited within me right now, Daniel, which is something that I asked on our first show together, and I want to ask it again to maybe elucidate a little bit better what I mean. So when Alex Gray, or when you have these psychedelic experiences and you see these various entities, what would you say is the experience of that actual world that you are in, as far as how you would be able to break it down? If you were, let's say, to take a microscope in that world and zoom in on the the skin and the cells of whatever entity you were looking at, would it just be composed of light, or would it be similar to, let's say, the experience of us looking at ourselves with all this skin and flesh and meat and blood and bones? Because I'm very curious, and I know I asked this before, but I'm just very curious in the architecture and the components of this astral realm, the psychedelic realm, this realm of thought, whatever you want to call it. What is it made up of, and would it work in a similar way to ours?
Here you're getting into I would just have to hypothesize. These are the same ideas that I discussed, in the books. If there are, higher dimensions, like if we're, if this is the fourth dimension, then there's like sixth dimension, seventh, eighth, ninth dimension, it's only in this dimension that you can have, this type of physical materiality. You can't have a not in like a higher dimension. So whatever exists there as a kind of aggregate of consciousness or self-awareness exists in a totally different way than we do here. One way to think about it is like, without, for us to have consciousness in a physical, universe, we have to have a, planet, we have to have a mineral layer, we have to have a sun, we have to have, biology, we have to have cells, we have to have chemistry, and, all those things are necessary for us to have consciousness. But maybe maybe consciousness is then the lowest level ground for something else, some other emergent property of the universe. And these other types of beings exist in levels of consciousness or dimensions of consciousness in ways that we can't quite understand yet, because it's a little outside of our understanding.
Well, people have attempted to understand, and do you look at it personally more from this Plato's theory of forms type of view, that first came the idea, and from the idea came the forms, or vice versa, or something completely different?
Well, if these things are in these higher dimensions, then they're also experiencing temporality, or there's a different form of temporality. They may only be able to experience themselves as being when they are in a communication or dialogue, or when they're able to enter the consciousness of a being like ourselves that's materialized in this universe.
And Owen, what say you as far as your conception of the universe? Regardless of...
I was going to ask Owen, like, your art is very much inspired by visionary art trends. You combine, like we've talked about this, you combine like illustration, medieval illustration, like the Book of Kells, with images and words, and you have a very succinct comic style. So were you influenced by people like Alex Gray or Venosa, or how did that?
It's a good question, man. A little bit easier to answer than explicating my entire view of like the physical and super physical universe.
All right.
Fine. No, I could. No, I'm just joking. But yeah, the psychedelic art thing, I do have something to say about that. Yeah. I wouldn't say I was directly influenced by those guys, but I did really like Alex Gray for a while. Not to say that I don't like him now. He's a really great artist, obviously. I went up to Cosm, where he has like Chapel of the Sacred Mirrors going on. I met him once, but he wouldn't remember me. We were just like at a party. So his art is really, really great. I think he really is like the ultimate axis mundi of a whole world of psychedelic art, right? He really quintessentially
starting with Fuchs
embodies,
and
he embodies that style really, really awesomely. I wouldn't say I was influenced by the like actual visual nature of a lot of that stuff. For me, a big piece of the puzzle at the time was a book called Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley, because at the time,
so good.
Yeah, it's a cool book. At the time, I was really into drugs, and I was really into religion, and I was really into art. And that book basically told me, oh, hey, these are all one thing. These are all different aspects of this thing called the visionary experience, and that's what unites all these things together. And that really was my like modus operandi for a long time. But I wouldn't say I was influenced by the actual visual nature of it so much so as like what it's supposed to do. I think that's why I poured it over really easily to sacred art, because what the art is supposed to do in terms of generating a state of mind in someone or carrying ideas or imparting spiritual knowledge even. That really is what's interesting for me about art in general. So influence, yeah, in a maybe indirect way. I think that your question about psychedelic art being revolutionary or potentially subversive is really interesting, because for me, it's difficult to imagine the strictly psychedelic art being subversive right now at this time. I mean, if you walked into, you know, like an Urban Outfitters or a Hot Topic or something, and you looked over on the wall, it's interesting to try and imagine what would be there that would be a subversive piece of psychedelic art. Because in my mind, I mean, there could be a shirt that says like, do ayahuasca, and I don't think there would be like a protest, or no one would really get mad about it, right? I feel like that's pretty much.
But I guess subversive, I mean, on a more intimate level, even like, would it inspire people to like go out and have like more sacred experiences, or would like, because the art world, they totally despise that type of like illustrative type of art. So
well, Daniel,
well,
what would
not
you,
all of it.
Wait. I was just gonna say
Yeah.
the interesting thing for me is it kind of comes back to what we were talking before about worldview and the general social worldview and all of that. Because if I think of a subversive psychedelic experience, really only one comes up, honestly, that I can think of recently in terms of anyone pop culture-y. He's not really popular, like in terms of normal people, but Roosh, who used to be like pickup artist. I write books about how to have casual sex with women.
Bang Brazil.
Took mushrooms.
Bang
He took mushrooms, and then he was like, oh, actually casual sex is really bad, and I'm going to turn my whole life around and talk about how people shouldn't be doing this and all that stuff. To me, that's infinitely more subversive than anything else I can really think of, because it goes against the grain of what people are being told.
Well, but that's also to
sex isn't bad.
But that's also to Daniel's point. I mean, Owen, you're showing an example of Daniel being right. So
well, I don't think Daniel would want to be right in this particular instance with Roosh V, though. I don't
No,
know.
why not? It's great. I mean, Daniel, we had this guy who was this, severe pickup artist who took mushrooms, and then his life transformed. Then he started attending church. So when we were talking before about, what about the people who, say that they got these benefits from being Catholic? Of course they did. That's great that they got these benefits. Some people get the benefits that way. Some people get the benefits from taking psychedelics. I see nothing wrong one way or the other. That's all I'm trying to say here.
I don't know. I think it's funny that like he came out against casual sex rather than like rape culture or anything like that. It's like, oh no, it's.
It says that structurally it's a product of like hookup culture. That's
no.
Well, Daniel, you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to interpret it, but sure. I mean, if his life got better, if he was living a kind of degraded life, and now he feels that he's living a better life, fine.
Yeah. Now I guess
the chat doesn't approve of my promiscuity. Whatever.
No, I
don't
guess
care. I don't care. I really don't.
No, you shouldn't. You are you're great. Alexander's great. I am an Alexander respecter, and so is everybody here. Now, I really think like when it comes to a lot of these conversations, it all comes down to, I really think, Owen, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you want the best for general people and well-being and stuff like that, and so does Daniel, so does Alexander, so does Gio, and so do I. I guess the real contentious
I don't
thing...
want the best for people.
No. Okay, fine. I guess the real contentious thing happens with these ideas. Like, we just take all these different ideas and say, I am this, I am that. In a way, this could be like the hippiest, dippiest thing that I've said this entire stream, but I really think it's true. That we associate ourselves so much with these ideas, with these egoistic things that we're putting on top of ourselves and saying, this is me. Me is all of these ideas that I stand for. And maybe it is, but the fact that we take it so personally and then we fight about it, it's just, I don't see the need to. Like, this is kind of what I'm trying to do in BTR. Even though, yes, sometimes arguing and fighting it's kind of fun. At the same time, like, I see much more similarity than I see difference. And if there are differences, like, let's just figure out, let's try to convince the other one, and no reason to, get things twisted into like this haze of
But also,
anger.
love the nature, I think the nature of mysticism, if we could leave off, I mean, just like the I think it's in some respects, even though I've strayed away from it. I mean, the psychedelic project being a way of reinvigorating people's capacity for mysticism in a disenchanted world, or whether or not that's impossible. I mean, that's always going to be the eternal question. So, like, that's probably what we're aiming for at the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely.
And right now I'm reading a book by this guy, Paul Kodenk, who I just discovered. It's called The Anarchist Revelation. And, he really analyzes it in great depth. Yeah, we're in this kind of like empty world, this kind of groundless world, capitalism has stripped away so much, from our capacity to connect in community, to, understand what the sacred is, and so on. And, it's tough, we're kind of orphaned in a way, and we don't really necessarily know, how to get back to them. I don't think it's going to be through, Catholicism. I don't think it's going to.
It could be. I mean,
I don't think it's going to be through imitating, indigenous people, and there's a lot of people in Tulum and so on who are just wearing kind of indigenous fabrics and going to Brazil, and former tech entrepreneurs who now want to join different indigenous tribes. That also feels kind of like a fail to me. So, we're in an emergent space. Maybe something will emerge, or maybe not. But the book is good. The Anarchist Revelation by Paul Kodenk. Very interesting.
I'm gonna take a look at it right now.
What is the sacred in your view?
What's that?
What is the sacred in your view?
Good question.
That's a great question. It's a really interesting question. I'm just going to let that sit there. I don't know. I'm not going to like rush into an answer, but I mean, I think, life is sacred.
Maybe silence
is sacred. It's like,
is pain sacred?
I mean, I think it's about a perceptual shift. I mean, for me, like one of the, I guess great experiences of kind of a sacred world was I helped organize 2 retreats with these indigenous cultures in the Columbia called the Kogi and the Arawak. The Kogi are featured in a film called Elder Brothers Warning to Humanity. They're basically an intact pre-Incan civilization. They wear white. They don't use psychedelics. They do use the coca leaf. The men chew the coca leaf a lot. But in a very ceremonial way. But basically, the mamos, like the teachers of the Kogi and the Arawak, just had incredible dignity, and you could feel that they were living in the sacred reality, like with every gesture they made, with every word they used, the way their even the way their families would position themselves on the ground. It was really like encountering kind of the Taoist idea of like the true man of the Tao, who lives at the center of the world and understands that they represent the bridge between heaven and earth. So that was like for me like a an access. What's that?
Daniel, do you remember this book you told me about?
Of course, I wrote about that book in great length in 2012. I think it's one of the most incredible books of the 20th century.
So thanks to you, Daniel, I've been reading and I fully read the Daimonic Reality by Patrick Harper. I always tell people about that book.
Incredible masterpiece.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And now I'm reading this one, and it's very interesting. When you were talking about these tribes that go through all these various ordeals, various ceremonies, in a way, if their consciousness, and I'm not them, so I can't really speak for them, unless I'm just like observing certain things and taking a guess. But my guess is that they're more in a dream state than we are. They're more in this interconnected dream state, but at the same time,
I don't
know. Would that be? Would you agree?
I'm thinking immediately of this. That Robert Lawler also wrote a really great book on the Aboriginal Australian Aboriginals with Voices of the First Day, and I think one of the stories he tells in that book, or maybe it was in Bruce Chatwin's book on the Aboriginals, is like this white person, anthropologist going to visit the Aboriginals and trying to figure out what they mean by the dreaming, and the Aboriginal pointing to a plane in the sky, and he says, "White man dreaming." So you could turn it around and actually argue that they're more in touch with the primordial essence of reality, and we're more in a kind of dream that we think we're going to be satisfied by like certain types of material objects, or consumer goods, or casual sex, or anything.
Oh, Alexandra.
What?
But the question for me comes down to, what is this thing, the ego, and has it been as developed, like the sense of, let's say, an individual self within these communities, as opposed to being developed in us,
Yeah,
where we have a lot more problems. We have, in terms of, constantly fretting, constantly worrying about this and that, while they seem to be much more in this hive mind space.
Well, before we get into that, I think Owen, what would be your view of the sacred? Do you have a? I know we talked about this, but just for clarification, you are an Orthodox Christian, or
I am just Christian, you could say. I would say what's sacred are things that are of God.
What's of God?
I asked that question. Well, we have to figure that out, I guess.
Fuck.
But
No,
there,
this is it.
well, there is like a. Well, the reason I asked that is because, yeah, I think that part of going through a spiritual endeavor, especially as a group with like a group of people, is like we're very prone to using terms and letting them guide us without actually fleshing out or knowing what those terms mean. And in a group of people, or in a society especially, that can get really dangerous. If you have 10 people together and they're like, we're going to do, what we want to do is just, let's get justice. You could have 10 different definitions of justice. And then all of a sudden you can have kind of a crazy situation going on. So
you
yeah,
would say the sacred is contextualized within a tradition, then that would be the most fundamental point.
I think everyone's idea of what's sacred is contextualized in a larger worldview. Yeah. I mean, for me, it has to do with tradition in a sense, but it's almost like, for me, it has to do more with this is just me personally. This is not like representing anyone else like that also shares my worldview. But I think it has to do with parsing out very carefully what we can hold up as sacred and what the goal is. Sort of like everyone's running, and we really have to parse out exactly where we're trying to go, because you might meet someone who's like, well, the sacred is, things that are, I really wish I had a fake definition to go with right now, but things that connect us, things that connect people are inherently sacred. But like, okay, people do crimes together and that connects them. Is that sacred? Things that are sacred are things that happen to us and make us better. Well, like, I got in a car accident. I guess that made my mind better. Like, was the car accident sacred? You know what I mean? And those
according to
questions,
Bataille, doing crimes together could be sacred, but
yeah, it could be, depending on what you're doing. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like what I was starting out talking about initially. Like, it entails a larger systemic view, but when that remains fuzzy and not fleshed out, it's just a really interesting situation.
And how would you address the question that I was, not really question, but what I was commenting on earlier, this possible evolution, transformation of the ego? Where do you see a difference between more of these, various Aboriginal tribes versus us, as far as their perception versus ours? And again, I can't really go into their head, but as far as what we're able to observe.
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing I hit there is that inherently, I think Western people that are spiritually inclined have a presupposition that the ego is inherently bad and that the ego is a pathology in and of itself. That might come from Eastern systems or looking up to X, Y, and Z. I couldn't really say, but that's the first thing I hit there, because for me, the ego and the self isn't an inherently bad thing. You actually exist. It's not an illusion. You are an individuated self, and there are positive aspects to it. So I think that answering that question entails that, because generally, like I said, the presupposition is people come to a group and they're like, wow, look, like, these guys are so cool. Like, they have no ego. Like, they don't even think of themselves as individuals. They just think of themselves as part of the group. And I don't think that's inherently good or bad. And I think that setting that vector in the direction of like, well, how can we get rid of the ego? For me personally, ultimately, I think it's not what you asked me, but I think it is like a failed endeavor, because you really do have an ego and you really do actually exist. It's not an illusion.
But at the same time, do you think that Western like sort of notions of like objectivity and like externally driven like individualism, you obviously wouldn't, you would see like the downside of that? Or
Objectivity and
well, no, like the sort of outward looking, like, we have to look outside of ourselves and project our like, post enlightenment rationality onto the world, sort of deal.
It cuts both ways. I'm not comfortable saying it's inherently bad.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say
I'm
it's
gonna have to take your
inherently
trad card right now. So.
But as far as these various influences that these tribes have, I remember, Daniel, in 2012, you were writing about your experience with taking, it wasn't ayahuasca, it was the tree bark, the African tree bark. What was that called?
Ibogaine?
Ibogaine, yes. Where you were in the Iboga ceremony and you saw this stick man, this entity who was made out of sticks. And what exactly is the relationship that that tribe had to that particular figure, if you can remember? And in general, how do they perceive the spirit world? Like, do they see it in kind of like this, what was that, the Julian Jaynes version of the bicameral mind, speaking, one hemisphere being the voice of the gods, speaking to the other? Like, would they see themselves as being controlled by the gods, basically?
So yeah, I mean, I'm actually going to jump off in a minute. 'Cause actually, I was only going to stay for like an hour and a half. It's got longer. An hour.
And I appreciate you being here. So thank you.
So I'm not going to answer that question because I kind of answered it in the book, and people can. But I do want to go back to the original question. Well, first of all, yeah, but I actually agree with Owen that it's a dumb idea to try to get rid of the ego. The ego exists for a purpose. It's our like lens with which we should look at reality. The question is to have mastery over your ego. Which means to have, some mastery over your shadow material, so you don't project it through the ego.
Individuation.
Ego is neither good or bad. It's an essential part of our human makeup. As long as we're in physical form, we're gonna have an ego, and to think that we're just gonna get rid of it or that would be a good thing is probably a terrible idea. But having said that, it is interesting that we are living in a hyper individualized society, and things are constructed so that we all want to have our like selfie moment and be on Instagram and have our little 5 minutes of fame or whatever. And a nice little story, which maybe I'll end this time with you with, is from the group of documentary filmmakers wanted to make a film with an Australian Aboriginal tribe community. And rather than just making the film about them, they decided they would make the film with them. So they went to the community, and first they showed them all these different ethnographic documentaries. And they were like, "What do you think of these? How would you like us to make a film with you?" And they were like, "Well, the first thing is we don't want there to be any close-ups. We want the whole community to be visible in every shot." So that's how they shot the film. They did it with a wide-angle lens, and the whole community was in every shot. So those are people like if you were a baby and you were put in an Aboriginal community, you're not genetically different from them very much. You would grow up and you would have that same value system. You would even be interested in putting yourself forward. You would believe that the community as a whole was the integral unit.
What was the name of the documentary, by the way?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I did see it, and you might be able to find it through some clever Google searches. But anyway, the point is that this type of individual subjectivity that in a way we're stuck with and kind of burdened with, is not the be all and end all. And societies can be constructed in different ways. And also, progress, as we've defined it, is not the be all and end all. It doesn't have to continue in a linear form. We could decide,
it rarely does.
Yeah, we can decide that we want to break up some of our technologies. We can decide that we want to tear apart some of our roads and take down some of the skyscrapers and live in a different relationship, if we want to. So I'm going to leave you guys there, and everybody have a great time. And
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for coming, Daniel. I really appreciate
Thank you, Daniel.
Let's get a drink next time you're in New York City.
Yeah, for sure. I should be there in May some point, late.
Excellent.
Ciao.
All right, brother. Take care. Bye-bye. So, everybody, I really want to thank Daniel Pinchbeck. Okay, all you bastards in the chat that were constantly mogging him, calm the fuck down. He was great. I had a great time.
Lev, I feel like you should have let them fight a bit more.
No, because I would have thrown up. I would have vomited into my wastebasket. It's too much masculine energy. Oh my god.
I really wanted to lean into that, but I didn't want to be rude because it's not my show. It's not my
I feel like mix of,
I just don't want to be disrespectful to you or Daniel, but I feel that we could have done more with it. It would have. I feel like we're edging, but I don't know.
Edging like a gooner.
Yeah, exactly. I feel maybe we should have leaned into it more, but then I don't know.
Yeah. Now, look, Daniel's
the masculine energy. Alexandra,
maybe I shouldn't call it masculine energy. Whatever, it's whatever triggers my fight or flight.
Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe
gag reflex.
But Alexandra, maybe you just need to find a good man in your life.
Oh, Gio, who do you have in mind?
I don't know, someone. But no, this was.
Gio, I want to sit in your lap and feed you cake, okay?
Oh God! Oh my God! Anyways, Owen, this was great, buddy. Jesus. Oh.
That's right. Pigeons together, Gio. I'm kidding.
Channeling the Marishi. So Owen.
You're so red.
Oh God. How will I recover? How will I recover? Well, we have the bimbo stream next week, so that's going to be fun.
Yes, we do.
But Owen, what do you think of the bimbo question, by the way?
I would need clarification on exactly what that is.
Well, bimbos are many things to many different people. I feel like there's a strange turning that's happening in our communities, Owen. I feel like the trad thought thing is a thing of the past, and there are more high IQ women posters that are engaging with far-right incels, and it's like I feel like the whole thing, like just using your sexuality to sell like some cottagecore lifestyle, that's sort of being thrown into question. I don't know. Like it's
God, that's such a 21st century sentence.
Yeah, but I understood it.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? I mean,
Of course, we're a product of it. We all are. We're on the stream, especially us, you know.
oh God.
Better or worse.
Yeah, he's married, don't do this to him. Yeah, it's true. No, but Owen, I think, yeah, there was a lot of valid criticisms, but I don't know. I feel like a problem, I've talked about this with my good friend Matthew, and he's also experiences with this. I feel like a problem with a lot of like new age people is that they, ironically enough, there's an aversion to criticism somewhat. I don't know if I'm saying that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting to tie those two things together, because like what you were saying, you know, women sort of entering the space to like oversimplify. It's not exactly what you said, but like I really actually do unironically. I respect women, you know, I cherish women.
We're women
I
respecting
uplift women. I really do. But I think that the conflict that you're talking about, like online, you didn't really describe it as a conflict, but it partially comes from, I think that there really is like a very different codified set of like energy playing out for men and women, and like it sort of dovetails with exactly the second thing you asked me, which is like, yeah, like in my mind, like I'm down to like take it there, you know, someone gets mad. I mean, also it makes me look like a bitch that he left, and now I'm like, well, I'm down to argue, so just, you know, shouting myself out there. But yeah, you know, for guys, I think guys are a little bit more used to like, oh dude, like you called me stupid, well, like I'm gonna lay out why you're stupid, and let's take it there, like I'm down, bro, like let's go. But then for women in general, I'm generalizing, I think that they feel a lot more of that like conflict energy, just in a different way. So I think that makes an interesting situation, you know, like we're having this conflict, you know, and then someone's like, hey, you guys chill. Not saying you shouldn't have done that, but it's just an interesting melding of all the different energies. And I think that plays out in the online space in an interesting way. You know, guys are very used to being like, here's why you're an idiot.
See, Owen, if it was a matter of me knowing how Daniel was going to react from previous things, then I would know. This is kind of a new thing for me to put Daniel in this kind of position where he could theoretically go away. So it's like, you know, like if this was something that I know, okay, like he can get in there, he can take it, he can, and maybe he could, I don't know, but it's like,
you're all good, you're all good, man. It's totally cool. You know what I mean? I always err on the side of like not being a dick. I'm not saying he was being a dick, but like for me personally, I try and err on like, so if someone's like, you know, feeling a certain way, I'm like, all right, I really don't want to make it like he's gone, now we're talking about him, so we can like talk about something else.
But I do feel the one thing I would say, just to leave off this, would be, I feel like there's a lot of like, I shouldn't like say this, but I have a friend actually who is working with that one study in Toronto for MAPS, and we've had our disagreements about the general direction of psychedelia and psychedelic culture. And I think like the problem is that it seems to like the selling point is that it does go one way, but it's very like, at least in terms of like these spaces, it's very rare to like see someone like you who is like went through it in a way that most people even haven't, but then to come out the other side as rejecting it. And it's a very rare, like, you know, when you see, I remember like the one time, what was it? It was like on Joe Rogan where like Graham Hancock's like, I gave up weed, and everyone in the chat's like, oh my God. Like,
Yeah,
oh.
they go nuts. They go nuts.
They go nuts because it's like, I don't know. I don't want to be cynical, but well, I guess I do actually. But at the same time, I feel like it's a way of trying, like people in the chat were saying, like, not the people that were being, well, I personally don't care if people are being disrespectful. There's people that say shit about me in the chat, whatever. But like there are valid criticisms in terms of like getting enlightenment on the cheap, for lack of a better term. And I think like the way to like,
yeah, you can't force it.
Yeah. And like, when I started like questioning, like, okay, there's other things I question about Terence McKenna's worldview, obviously, like his take about human populations and like the dominator ego is kind of sus, but whatever. But when he said like, yeah, I tried meditation and it was just too boring. It's like, I don't know. I feel like it's the same product of like this Western modernism of like, we have to get it fast and now, and it's give me the DMT on fucking sold to me on like I don't know, artisanal DMT that's like what's the food sharing thing, what's it called, the delivery, like skip the dish but DMT, like come on now, it's gotta it's gotta be artisanal. I'm watching Rick and Morty while I have artisanal marijuana. I feel like that's I don't know. So I feel like that's a problem because there's not a context there that can deliver people into a greater, and that's something that you say, Owen. Like I remember reading, this was like back in, I want to say 2018. This is how long ago it was. But that thread you had about psychedelics in general, like that, like at the time I was just getting out of it. I'm like, damn, that's like, you were hitting at something that, and you got a lot of flack for it. I mean, the thread you got a lot of flack for, let's face it, the AOC thread. That was legendary, by the way. I didn't mention it last time, but that AOC thread, oh my God, that was like, ugh. But no, the psychedelic thread was another one where a lot of people were like ganging up on you. They're like, how dare you like criticize, how dare you say it can lead you down a wrong path. But yeah,
the thing is, I mean, that's kind of why I like talking about it, especially, you know, in certain situations, because, you know, I used to be like that with weed, where like someone's like, oh, you know, like you just said, like with the Joe Rogan thing, like literally I used to be just like that. And that's kind of why I really like illuminating in my own mind, like the go-to arsenal, like the go-to tautologies that these like different views have. Like if you criticize weed, the first thing someone says is like, oh, but what about alcohol? You drink alcohol, don't you? And then you're like, well, I don't drink alcohol actually, you know? And then like, oh, well, I bet that you just had a situation where you smoked too much weed. And you're like, not really actually, you know, and they have this like arsenal to go to. And in general with like ayahuasca people, I definitely get that. I mean, I'm not talking about him, I'm talking about people I'm thinking of in real life. Like you definitely have that where they're like, well, you just have to try it. And you're like, well, I did try it. And they're like, well, you didn't do it like with a shaman. And you're like, well, I did actually. And they're like, but maybe you didn't do this thing. And you're like, I did that thing too. And I think it's really hard to get to a point where like any valid logical criticism can be unpacked without the lens turning back on you to be like, well, you just got like, you know, maybe a shaman killed your dog and now you have this crazy irrational hatred.
Like who hurt you?
So
I remember that
biased
was
you're just so biased that you can't even, you know, begin to consider logic for 1 second. Like I can't even reason with you. So, you know what I mean?
I think like to play devil's advocate, I do think that if there is a material benefit to veterans or people that go through PTSD or people that have clinical depression, if they could like get off of the suicide pills. Like I have an argument all the time with a very close family member, not to reveal who has clinical depression, who's been on pills basically his whole life. We have this argument all the time about the efficacy of drugs and whether people need them. But I feel like if psychedelics do promise in clinical trials that it can help people, then I think, you know, it's good. But at the same time, I mean, I don't want to get all like, you know, like Michel Foucault, like every fucking stream. But to me, it's like like hippies going to my fucking microphone right there. Hippies like going to the medical establishment and getting consent for their worldview, to me is just, I don't know. I don't think Daniel's doing that, but he's got criticisms of it. But I feel like the people, like I say, I have a friend, or whether I grew up with a guy, I have a friend who is with that guy. I can never pronounce his last name for the life of me. John Vicar, something. I forget. He's a YouTuber, but he's also in Toronto, University of Toronto. And we've had this discussion where, like, yeah, okay, there's material benefits, but I think like if it could lead people to a place where, you know, it's the even just like hinting at the fact that people are on a spiritual and even genetic level different, and they will interact differently to these substances. I mean, that is like so beyond the pale to like this like hippie egalitarian worldview. I mean, even like in the modern left, I mean, that's something we could talk about. Like the modern contemporary, like, I mean, the wokes, they have their own theology in a different way. But for a long time, like during the 90s and 2010s, they like basically got rid of their like new age shit. Like they peeled off the Free Tibet stickers from their Honda Accords. They're like, no, we have to be atheists now. We have to be godless communism now. But now it's like they're going back in a weird way, like to this, what Carlsbad called last stream, this like woke integralism, this like woke ethnic integralism of like faith-based like intergenerational trauma being like a metaphysical. Like, I don't know, and what do you think of those takes about like modern woke religion? Like, do you think it's a religion, or do you think like that's just like a fucking James Lindsay take or
and
something?
Also, for those who were wondering what I was eating a moo. Anyway, Owen, go on.
Yeah, I also have some steak ready for me after the stream, but go ahead.
Nice. Yeah, it definitely functions as a religion in certain ways. I mean, saying something functions like as a religion, like what does that even like mean, you know? Not to be like too meta. But yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting, I guess the most interesting take I would have on that is that there's actually a really weird sync up that comes together with what you could call like esoteric-y, Gnostic-y, New Age stuff, and sort of the scientific atheism, humanism thing. They actually do go together, even though that seems like the most unintuitive thing ever. I mean, if you trace like both of those things back, the first real, I mean, I'm not a scholar of humanism, but if I think of humanism starting out, I think of like, what's his name? Pico Mirandola in the Renaissance in Florence. Right. But he was a Kabbalist. He was an occultist. He was literally like, he got excommunicated, I'm pretty sure, from the church for writing a whole book about how like Kabbalah was integrated with Christianity and all this stuff. So that sync up, which also happens in like urban areas, by the way, non-coincidentally, is there. And I've really thought about it a lot. It's really, really strange. I think it has to do with like those floating terms. You know, you can meet someone who really is like a scientific atheist, but they're really into Buddhism. You can meet someone who's like, yeah, like, so, I mean, even the terms they use, like energy, like source energy, like we're getting in contact with source energy and stuff, you know, they go together. But as for why, you know, I can't really say. There is, you mentioned like the political aspect. There is also an interesting sync up with the politics, because like there's this sort of, denial of material conditions having an effect that I see sync up with the New Age stuff. Like for me, a lot of New Age stuff, and like where a lot of people, no one in particular, ends up like with psychedelics is where it's like, you know, if you were to make a caricature of it, let's put it that way, like a total caricature, it's like, you know, like bad things just happen and it doesn't really mean anything. Like the universe is like love and light. You know, I feel like there's some sync up there too, with like a denial of like evil and the negative aspects of reality that syncs up with certain like political views. But as for why, it's really interesting, man. It's really hard to say.
Well, even like just the class thing, like there's like people like even like Chapo ironists who like don't have a spiritual bone in their body, like fucking Carl Biesier, or that fucking DJ guy that pretended to be post left, but really he's like a total maniac. Not to name him because he'll go after me, but he's gone after all my friends. But then people like that, like they'll criticize people like Amy Therese. They'll go after them and they'll be like, oh, class politics don't matter anymore. Material conditions, we've transcended them. We're going to have glorious space neoliberalism. And it's like, to me, I mean, maybe it's because they're like fucking grad students that come from upper middle class backgrounds. Who knows, right? But you're right. There is like sort of this like Eric Vogelin point of Gnosticism Gnosticism is a predicate for other forms of Gnosticism, whether it's like New Age, like hippy dippy humanism, or whether it's like total like transhuman scientistic, like total apocalypticism of like transforming the human into this postmodern, like this is not like post-human entity. I mean, in a way, this was like 90s cyberdelia. This was like tech people getting like going to fucking Eastland and hearing like Terrence McKenna talk, right? Like this, I mean, like that to me, I think just it brings up so much questions of where we're going with this. You know, I don't know.
Can you possibly imagine a scenario where the horseshoe theory, which I know ends up being besmirched a lot, but there may be something to that. If we're talking
you had a really
about
funny
people,
vocal crack there for a minute, Lev.
That's because I had salad. I had some.
Oh, that's why.
Yeah, this is good salad, by the way. Look at this.
And
stuff
someone
here.
in the chat asked me, Alexander, if you ever gone goth, you should have the.
I am goth.
look. No, but like dye your hair black and accentuate the.
My hair
like,
is black.
No, but.
So okay, so
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Owen. So with this,
You need the
horseshoe theory,
Yvonne DiCarlo look. You have to have the white streak. Never mind.
Whatever.
So
I'm
th-
gonna.
so this-
I'm gonna
I will
get.
teach you. No. Go ahead, love. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
If the chat wants to style me, like, do it. I'm so for it. Please make some suggestions.
the Alexander Plotnik dress-up game. Yeah.
Yes.
So okay, so Owen.
Right now, you're gonna be so psyched.
All right, so you know the horseshoe theory, the idea that people who are on the far left are just like the people who are on the far right and vice versa. Do you subscribe to that? And if no, why not? I know this is kind of straying away from psychedelics, but I'm just curious.
No, definitely not.
Okay, why not?
Well, to not get all meta of like, what does it even mean to be like on the left or right? But that would be like a valid road to go down. I think I see horseshoe theory apply to like some things where it's like, do you like guns? If you go far enough left, people start to like guns again. You know, if you go right, they like guns, obviously. I think it applies to some things. But in general, not really. I think that in general, there are different like bases for the different worldviews that I don't really see like connecting all the way at the end. I think they connect in certain instances, maybe if you were like, what about this specific policy and this specific thing? But
Well, take something like, for example, authoritarianism. So authoritarian regimes, let's say if there was a based and trad-pilled authoritarian who would come in and start to institute things that you may not be as opposed to, is that different from the leftists getting their authoritarianism, you know, like a Chavez-style guy or Morales or whatever, to come in and start to nationalize all the property? Like, the results may be different, but as far as like getting somebody in there, some strongman in there to institute a particular thing through force, would you say that if that were to happen, people along your camp would agree with that if it was their guy? If it was / our guy?
I'm sure some people would be into that. I think that the crux there would be that I don't really see like authoritarianism, which is like itself like a loaded term, or like the tendency to use authority to coerce people. I don't really see that as like the left-right divide, really. For me personally, because like then what, like isn't Alex Jones like right wing, but Alex Jones is like his number one quality is like resisting tyranny, you know, but then isn't, you know, we could find someone on the left too, like isn't this guy lefty, you know? So I think that it goes a little bit deeper. For me, the best pin I could put in it is like how people are or should be organized, more specifically like what unites people. I think as you go like further on the left or lefty style, it's more like class is what unites people and like material conditions. Whereas on the right, what unites people is more like what I've come to call peoplehood, which could be people based on like, well, I'm thinking of like peoplehood, like a people, like the Korean people, or like the
like ethnicity or religion.
Ethnic nationalism.
Well, it could be. The thing is, it gets a little complicated because it could be based in an ethnic kind of thing, or it could be based in a nationality, or it could be
or
even
religion
or something. But it's more like that is what unites people. And I think that's the best model I've come up with, because even with something like if I was going to try and get the most like horseshoe theory style, I'd probably, it's a really weird example, but I'd probably think of something like, you know, almost like North Korea, where it's like they're socialists, right? They're almost like kind of commie, but like not really.
But they're extreme ethno-nationalists.
But they're based in like the people, and it's like this government serving the people. You know what I mean? So it's like, is that right-wing ethno-nationalism?
Wait, which government is that again?
North Korea.
North Korea.
Touché.
But I think that they
Ideology.
get characterized more as left-wing because I don't really think their emphasis
They're
is on like.
communists.
No, but
They're
that is
literally
actually,
communists.
but that is actually, I think, a good example of an extreme that would be
Well, they're
so
communists, but
ambiguous
they're like-
as far as where it would be, that it would actually be a great example of things going into that horseshoe theory. Glasscake, shout out to the great Glasscake. He says the modern right-left dichotomy is resisting tyranny versus enforcing equity. Now, here's where I would differ. If we are talking about, like, let's face it, some people who are within more of the reactionary circles, they're not libertarians. They're not searching for there to be like independent communities that would, I mean, maybe some are, but I'm sure that there are some who would welcome a dictator coming in and setting up order and everything being nice and orderly. And this is why I would equate those people, however you want to categorize them, if they are people who, regardless of whatever sauce we're talking about, because Owen, your example of, let's say, having, this more national or ethnic-based versus having more of an egalitarian-based system, I see these as different sauces. And I'm talking about the fact that these sauces, some people would yearn for a chef who would have, who would use one sauce versus another sauce for the dish. But
even like what Owen was saying, like, I think we didn't, maybe, Owen, if you could elaborate, the point we were making about openness and how that's not like inherently a good. Like, I remember it's like, my professor, my mentor, he said, some people are so open-minded that their brains fall out. I feel like in the 60s, that's what happened.
Yeah,
like,
no, that is.
And there were studies being done. I know studies, right? I mean, that was like when ZHP especially was around, it was like the studies thing. But there were studies to show how like people that are predisposed to like having psychedelic experiences, they're like high on openness already. But then that's challenging because this one hit piece I remember reading about where it's like how like these alt-right people were taking psychedelics and how, it's not as what it's cracked up to be. I mean, it is generally true though that like people that like this thing about open-mindedness being inherently a good. I mean, that's another image of thought. But what like
as a personality trait, not as like a kind of what we may consider like open-mindedness in like the hippiedom sense. Of just like accepting everything and not questioning anything. And
but like even in Daniel's book, like he has this one chapter about like the sexual revolution, about how like some people will choose to leave monogamy, others people won't. It's like this, and this was written like before the whole like fucking polycule shit was coming into discourse, right? So I don't know, like Owen, what do you think of like the whole open-mindedness thing? Like, I don't know.
Well, it's kind of an interesting term. I mean, in terms of everything you're talking about, I think that sync up is there because I think it's also why I don't want to make like ultimate statements, but I think like, just when I look at people generally, like it's a little bit easier to rope people over to like the lefty side, I think, at this time and place, because when you start asking questions like, oh, like, why can't we just like magically feed everyone? Like, oh, why can't we just like give everyone a house? Like, why can't we just like leaning into those things, whether they're good or bad, whatever people's political views are that they're listening to right now. Like, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, true, yo, why don't we just do that? Like, we can do anything. Like, and then you start to feel like you're kind of like on the left, but pushing back against those things and saying like, hey, reality has like these limitations, and we're constrained by these like material conditions, and we have to like look out for ourselves, and we have to kind of be careful, because then all of a sudden you're kind of like more on the right, I would say, generally. And, you're asking about open-mindedness and stuff. I think that a lot of times in terms of like social views, open-mindedness is kind of characterized that way. Like, you're being closed-minded. Like, why don't we just X, Y, and Z? And then if you give them the answer of like, I don't know if that's going to work out, man. Like, I think there's larger things you're not considering. It's really easy to get hit with like, well, you're not being like open-minded enough.
Yeah. And like if you're especially if you're a woman, and you're like pressured to do something you don't want to do. It's like the whole deal, like, you're not, just open your mind, see the new reality. And what it actually is indoctrination, if like somebody is like pushing you towards a certain viewpoint and like accusing you of not being, open enough, like generally that's a trap.
Yeah.
Alexander,
Yeah.
you saying women are more susceptible to
Women are more susceptible to social
programming?
pressure. Yes, yeah, I am actually. I think women are more trusting.
Based.
Like literally, like oh my god, I thought
See,
it
I'll
was
turn you into a
obvious.
trad cottagecore wife yet. Don't worry about it. No, I'm kidding. I'm
Oh,
kidding.
you're gonna
Go
be like a Disney
I'm
princess
only
wife,
half kidding.
and you're gonna be singing while making a beautiful pasta
But
dish
no,
for
but-
Gio, and then the
Okay,
pigeon,
I can
and then the
cook,
pigeon
I
is gonna
can't
fly
sing.
down.
No, but I sorry. I keep this stupid fucking bullshit I have. But it is true. Like you would think that it. I don't want to say it. I'm not saying it that way, but it is true. A lot of women they do feel a sort of unique social pressure, even on a psychological level.
Yeah.
I mean, Owen can test this. We've talked about this, but also on Twitter. I mean, it seems that all people can fucking talk about this month is like whether men are at fault or women are at fault or why things are shit. And I remember Owen, you were responding to this one particular person, but even like today before the show, I was while watching some Pinchbeck stuff, but I was listening to the recent episode of Default Friend and Personality Girls podcast After the Orgy, episode 4. And by the way, go and listen to their podcast. Default Friend will be here on BTR next week with Bimbo Ubermensch,
Yes.
and Chaotic Girl. And so they were talking about this story that was very, very popular a few years ago in all the literary spheres. Oh, you guys, Alexandra, you must have read this one. The cat one, where the woman had this like story of the New Yorker. It was about like she had like not pressured, but like kind of like bad sex with this older dude.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that story?
No, this is in the New Yorker.
It was in the 2010s. It was a very popular short story that all these journalists were talking about. This was like at the height of the Me Too thing. In like
can you like what are names? Who is this guy?
I think it's called The Cat by I'll look it up for you.
All right, yeah, I'll look it up right now. The Cat.
And they were talking about about how we culturally we can't exactly place like a moral matrix upon these different things that make us feel bad. Oh wait, I have the episode. It's called Cat Person by Kristen Rupinian.
Yeah, I found it.
Yeah,
Ooh,
Cat Person.
Yeah, it looks heavy. Hopefully it will not trigger my PTSD.
It's not the best written thing though. But anyways, we can't really place a moral or cultural framework upon things that are violating our experiences, but it's not exactly legally, quote unquote, not without consent, but yet at the same time they make us feel disgusting inside. Although I disagree with this writer. I don't think having sex with a fat man is particularly disgusting, but that's only self-interest. But it's in some ways you can't knock it till you try it. Anyways, I think that this sort of this attitude comes out of, unfortunately, this like hippie new age drug culture. And I don't mean to sound like fucking what's the guy's name, Jerry Falwell or whoever, but I mean kind of, but it comes out of that milieu of like, don't knock it till you try it, have these open experiences. Not to say that Daniel Pinchbeck was saying that. Of course, I was actually surprised that Daniel was very willing to criticize a lot of like the like psychedelic ideology, if you will. But at the same time, it's like this attitude of like this moral, and again, like Owen, you please talk about Seraphim Rose, talk about how this is all nihilism at its root, and this like sort of pressuring people to be open to experiences, how this can like lead down
that's
a bad path.
Yeah, that's what happened, like, in the 60s. That's why people kind of soured to it, is that
there were communes, like there was sexual assault rampant in these communes.
We didn't have even the oh god, well, I mean, like, you're going from the 50s, which was a very like sexually uptight era, to the 60s, which was like, I mean, and by the way, not everybody in the 60s embraced sexual liberalism. It was actually
I have aunts who like
bad.
lived at the time. They didn't
casual sex isn't bad. I'm not saying it's
casual
bad,
sex. I can give you the studies where women, the genetic material. Never mind. Anyways, it influences the grafting of your brain patterns.
If you know what you're doing, it's not. If you don't know what you're doing, you can get really hurt. You can get fucked over so easy. Like there are a lot of women out there who are not doing what they were used to do because they had bad experiences. But I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with casual sex practice with safety and with like mutual respect. Like,
well, we could argue whether that would even entail respect to begin with in a casual sex framework. But my point being is that this sort of the really like the hippie sort of worldview that became instantiated in pop culture. But Owen, you wanted to talk about Seraphim Rose. This is what I wanted to talk about, because I am also I'm not an Orthodox Christian. I'm a Catholic because I'm genetically predisposed to Catholicism because of my Italianness. But give me like Seraphim Rose. I mean, the one part I didn't agree with the nihilism was when he talked about contemporary art, but that's like my own personal bias. But when he specifically talked about, if I recall, he did do LSD back in the day, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did. He lived in San Francisco and like around that time.
Yeah. And but the overarching framework of nihilism, please enlighten us with
Well, the main way that his work, I guess you could say, intersects with my vibe, I should say that I climbed in there and took out like everything I could, like a little bandit, is really orthodoxy in the religion of the future. I did read Nihilism. What's it called? Nihilism, Roots of Discontent in the Modern World, or something like that.
Yes.
That is a really good book. In case anyone's listening to it, it's really, really short. It's really good. And but yeah, the main thing for me would be more like orthodoxy and the religion of the future. He also has something called the Orthodox Survival Guide. And I think that a lot of it, I mean, now I'm kind of like paraphrasing like into my own situation, and like with what you guys are talking about now, is a lot of it is about like a denial of like the actual material conditions. I don't think that he would phrase it that way, like the material conditions. It's more like the situation that God has like imparted to us. But for me, what would be relevant to all this is more like orthodoxy and the religion of the future. That is really about taking like all this stuff, almost like everything actually that we've talked about, and putting it into what would, an Orthodox Christian say about this. And that's what I think is really interesting, because it opens up sort of an avenue of critique that is not typically explored.
And if you could, for people who haven't read, how does he critique a lot of the excesses of 60s culture that he saw in his lifetime with like the Orthodox Christian approach?
That's a good question. Is the sexual stuff addressed in that book?
Well, not just sexual, but I guess anything like
in general.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it, I don't want to say like I'm characterizing his view. I'll say more like what I've picked up from going through things like that, is that a lot of it is an expression of man's desire for something higher, for God. It's a natural expression. Like we are naturally made to try and elevate ourselves and to seek, something higher than ourselves. And I think that seeing a lot of that stuff within that framework really illuminates a lot of it. I mean, a lot of the like 60s stuff and things that go after that, like 70s, 80s even, is like pretty insane, man. Like primal, like screaming therapy and people trying to like climb through like makeshift birth canals and being like reborn and all this stuff.
And Jodorowsky spoofed a lot of that in The Holy Mountain too. Yeah, the Orgasmatron and
Yeah, so I see a lot of it through that lens. It's more like he kind of like flipped a switch on in my brain, and then I couldn't not see it that way. Like even just what I just mentioned, like climbing through a birth canal and trying to be like reborn, like you're trying to be reborn. You're trying to like remake yourself, right? But that's what the Holy Spirit does. That's like what, like come over here to this building where we're not like naked and screaming, like come try it out. And I think there's this kind of like fetishization of like shedding something, like shedding conditioning,
my shadow shedding skin,
or getting something, getting rid of something. You know what I mean? Like I see it everywhere, from everything like the Terrence McKenna stuff, where ultimately why I broke with him in some sense is like he sees the fact that culture impresses upon you as like inherently negative. He's like, you have this cultural programming, that's true, but you have to get rid of it. It's bad. It's like a parasite on you, or even something like here, I met someone even in this like small town I lived in who was doing like radical like honesty therapy or something.
Oh, wow.
Just like literally saying whatever came.
How is he not
mind,
dead
like,
yet?
And like they would do that. It was a girl, and they would do this thing where like they would go somewhere and get naked in front of people, and like they would feel, naturally you would feel kind of like, I don't want to say shame, but you feel weird being naked in front of other people, right?
Yeah.
But for
a lot
them,
of the 90s feminists did this as well. Like Amanda Palmer going up there with a Sharpie naked and saying "write stuff on my body," stuff like that.
Ah, gee,
Yeah,
I'm so happy
so-
to know about Amanda Palmer.
Oh,
Yeah.
you want me to go into Bikini Kill in a minute?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I think that is related to all this, and I personally would relate it to like what I've picked up from Seraphim Rose, because in that sense, that person would like feel, let's say, shame or weirdness about being naked, and they would think, oh, who put this in my brain? Who put this like weird feeling about being naked in here? I got to get rid of this. I got to power through it.
Yeah.
But I would come from a different perspective and be like, that's innate. It's part of you. And like, that is like, you feeling that is normal and natural. You're looking for someone, some dark force that like planted this feeling in your brain. But actually it's like an innate part of your spirit that you feel weird being naked in front of like 20 other people that you don't know. Which
Well, we're
sounds
not culturally
ridiculous.
conditioned to do it, you know?
Well, Owen, what you're talking about right now with these people who jump on these various bandwagons, you know, primal screaming or stripping or whatever. The thing that
Well,
I have
there's this cult. I just saw it today trending. There's this Hollywood cult where celebrities go and they have this thing where like all the guys give all the women finger jobs, and it's like this orgasm cult I heard about.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
I encountered those in Denmark. I actually
Oh,
Oh
man.
God.
Yeah, dude, they're fucking creepy as shit, and they're so obviously a cult, and they so
Yeah.
obviously want your money. I was like on a meetup group with them, and I thought there was going to be free pie. That's how they kind of advertised it. There wasn't. And like the moment the conversation shifted to what they actually do, which is like finger banging for like enlightenment, the whole table, we were like a group of people sitting around, we just went silent. We're just like,
oh man.
And it's like all the guys they have to rotate to like all the different.
Yeah.
It's fucked, man.
Right.
But no, I think.
Well, if you have examples of these, though, like what I was going to say regarding all these people who jump on these various bandwagons and stick with them, they're after a lot of stimulation. And what I notice is that from, let's say, a lot of the Break the Rules audience as well, and this is going to be me laying down the criticism of our own audience, which I love.
Don't do
and
it. Don't do
respect.
it.
Yes,
No,
I will.
please.
I'm about to do it. Fuck it. I
Oh.
don't give a shit anymore. I'm about to do it. I think that a lot of people are after stimulation. I think that a lot of people are after something that can fill them up, and something, especially the younger they are, they're after something with a lot of edge to it. Where if they are going to, let's say, look at the open-mindedness or whatever, or look at the crazy leftist, I know social justice warrior has gone out of fashion, but when they look at all these different fucking people, they end up, I think, they want to have some stimulation in their lives, and they end up going into the complete opposite direction, where they don't actually see there being that much of a problem with a dictator stepping in and wrecking the shit they don't like and creating a system that they would like, because that is it's much edgier, and it's much sharper, and it's much, let's say, it's much more high time preference than somebody like Ben Shapiro or Barry Weiss, for instance. And I honestly do think that this is something that belongs to people who are not done finding things out yet. Like, I think we're all, like I said before with Daniel, we're all eternal students, and we all got shit to find out. And this idea that, okay, I got this figured out, I know what to do, this is based in red pilled and trad pilled, and I'm going to stick with this. I don't think that's enough, man. Like, I think we still have to keep learning.
Listen, let's get off the listen, chat. At least one parent loves you. In
See,
this
you don't even want to address the elephant
At least
in the room
I agree
here.
with you. But Owen, it's really
We can't be comfortable. We cannot be comfortable because this weakens us.
I know, but Spiro, but no, Owen, what you said is really apt, because I think like Seraphim Rose, he still had this unique ability, whether like a lot of Orthodox people, and someone in the chat, by the way, Lev mentioned that we should get like Church of Eternal Logos and Jay Dyer on, although I don't know. I mean, Jay Dyer is a pretty confrontational dude. I respect him. It would be pretty interesting though if we got Jay Dyer on. But
see, like the people who recommend it, they are only recommending slash R guys. They're not going to be recommending anybody who disagrees with what they think.
No, but
because it's uncomfortable.
Well, I mean,
it's
no,
not
but
comfortable to listen to somebody who disagrees with you. I
well,
understand.
the problem, Lev, I think, is the people that would disagree with us. It's kind of hard to convince them. I mean,
I can say also, I think that part
go
of
ahead.
something interesting, just in terms of like you guys planning stuff for the future, is like it also is interesting what like the premise is if two people disagree, you know, because like if I go somewhere and someone's like, yo, Owen's gonna debate this guy. Like, hell yeah. Like, it's
People
totally
watch.
different than like, you know, if it's like me feeling like, okay, but I kind of have to like wrestle you and like pin you down on like this specific point. Like, what about like this? You know,
I
it
gotta do
makes
the
it like a
job.
very like interesting vibe. I feel that in real life too. Cause like sometimes you'll be talking to someone and they'll be like, yeah, well, that's wrong because of this. And you're like, not really. And they're like, whatever. And then you want to be like, but it's not.
There's a way to do debates that come into a discussion later, but I feel like
Well, we do those with the
you're
reverse
very
debates.
invested in things.
Yeah,
Like
true.
you're
Like, and I told you about that reverse debate that we're going to have on Christianity versus paganism.
we're not going to do it. Actually,
Yes, we
I don't
are.
know, Lev. We should.
Yes, we are. No, we're doing it. We're doing it.
Yeah, but the
I have
problem.
a poll
Okay, the
set up.
problem, Lev.
We're going to get a Mormon, so everybody's happy. We're going to
The
get a Mormon.
problem is that you're essentially asking people to commit blasphemy. But that's, I mean, if I don't know if I should co-sign. I don't know if I could co-sign on that, to quote Ethan Ralph. But no, what I want to say, Owen, is that very interesting with Seraphim Rose. Well, we could debate about that debate, but what's interesting about Seraphim Rose is that he still managed to retain a lot of the good things that he learned in those circles. I mean, at the same time the hippies were going along, there was sort of like a meshing with like the new left politics of like anti-psychiatry. For example, R.D. Laing was good friends with Alan Watts, and R.D. Laing wrote he wrote like The Politics of Experience of the Birds of Appetite, but he also wrote The Divided Self. And so Seraphim Rose, he goes into a little bit of this from what I've read, but also like when Seraphim talks about like how the Orthodox person should interpret these things, like for instance, Terence McKenna, like what you talked about with him, that's like fucking like Terence McKenna's like, you know, that's like Jean-Jacques Rousseau with like drugs, you know. It's a lot of the stuff he says about humanity's future and the nature of the human and the nature of men and women and so forth. Like I noticed like a lot of those McKennites, from my experience when I was in those circles, they have like this really weird aversion to Christianity and to like pronatalism and things like that. And to me, I feel like every time you mention Christianity around like psychedelic people, unfortunately, they have like this gut intuitive response of like, this is the religion of mom and dad and like, fuck that. And I don't know. I feel like at the one end, they're like, yeah, Vajrayana Buddhism and you know, Vedanta and Shankara. But then at the other end, it's like when you talk about John of Clysome, it's like that's boring, terrible, oppressive, patriarchal stuff. And
yeah, well, that's the thing. New Age is every religion except Christianity.
Yeah.
New Age is like the validity of every single thought system that's ever existed except Christianity. I mean, that's like a fundamental premise of it, which, like you say, it's funny because no one ever tells them that. No one goes to like every person to be like, hey, just so you know, like these are the rules. But everyone intuitively picks up on it for sure.
Yeah.
And I can say that's definitely been the case in my life for sure. When I was in any circle, you can be like, I'm into like Northern European shamanism. I'm into like Vajrayana Buddhism. And then you're like, yo, I'm reading the Bible. People are like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really weird,
but it's
though.
strange though. There are people out there like we had, for example, the National Arts Club, Rupert Sheldrake, who was talking about, you know, he's a Christian and he participates in various practices that you could say are more of an occult sort. He went to India where he was in a monastery, which was a Christian monastery. So I don't know. It's weird. Like, I see what you're saying, Owen, but at the same time, I still think that there are people out there, hopefully, that would make room for Christianity within these circles too. I think they've been just brainwashed by a lot of bullshit having to do with like, you know, Christians just being these ignoramuses or whatever the media tries to portray. So
well, I think it's more of that. Like Christianity is like, they have a very like American like moral majority like like evangelical Protestant view. Like it's like they have this 60s romanticism about like we're fighting the drug war and we're, you know, they want to have they want to ban fun, they want to ban Ozzy Osbourne rock and roll and drugs and sex and I don't know, but then it's weird because like for example Alan Watts, he was basically going to become an Anglican priest.
Yeah.
But then yeah. And then he had a good take on it. He said that, you know, a lot of Christians, it's like, well, especially in England with the Anglicanism, they have a very stoic view of the world. And it's like some things like sexuality. He's like, well, how do you put it? they think their attitude is that these things ought to not have been, and it's like, but then of course he had his own foibles and problems in life, and I don't know. I feel like when you do build up a deity around people, when you build up this mythical personage, that a lot of these, like, you know, it happened all the time. Like Rhymeproach came from Japan and he taught these hippies, and you know, it's like it becomes idol worship after a while, and you know, I don't know. It's where am I going with this?
There's something that I think C.S. Lewis said, which is that at the end of time, it'll be Hinduism versus Christianity, because Hinduism, did we talk about this last time? Maybe it was here. No, I don't think it was here. But the Hinduism subsumes all religions. Hinduism, anything is compatible. It can always be like dropped in. But then with Christianity, it's the opposite. It's not compatible with anything else. So that at the end of time, you would have like those two vectors like opposing each other.
Would you agree with Zizek's take that Buddhism would be like the American, like, capitalist realist religion of the future?
That Buddhism would be the American realist capitalist religion of the future. If that would be true, it'd only be because Buddhism, almost by design, can be ported over and grafted over like other cultures. So maybe it wouldn't be like a slight for it, but it is kind of designed to go to another culture and sort of just be like the skin over it. I don't even mean that in a negative way, but it does that like when it goes to different countries.
Yeah, so like Mahayana Buddhism, for instance, is like one of,
if that was
have
true,
like
maybe
pantheons with their own like shaman, their own like local animist gods they'll have like next to. Yeah,
I mean, there's a whole, if you go to any bookstore now, you could probably find like a ton of books that are like quantum physics and Buddhism, like, you know, all that stuff. Like they're really the same, you know? Yeah, for sure.
Dance of the Woolly Masters. Yeah.
Cool.
So guys, I think this is coming to the end over here, but Owen Cyclops, you are amazing as always. I really appreciate you coming in here talking with Daniel.
It's always a pleasure every time, even though there's
Thanks.
a few hiccups here and there.
Thanks, man. Pleasure.
No, those are great hiccups. I think it is fun when people argue, but I do like to type things.
It was really scary.
Well, that's life, right? Like there's scary moments, and then it calms down. No, I think it went good. I think it went exactly as it should go. And in general, the only thing that I can leave you with before we end this thing is I just encourage everybody to, like, if you think the other side is in an echo chamber, like, maybe you're in an echo chamber too. Why is it the worst thing in the world to, like, endure information that you would find to be uncomfortable? So be uncomfortable for a while. This is what I want to do with Break the Rules, and we are going to be doing a lot more of it coming up, because here are the events
next
that we
week
got
we're going to have
up.
a stream where people are going to be very uncomfortable, especially with me involved. But
No, Gio,
I tend to scare the hose, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, if anyone wants to if anyone wants to like combatively argue and like get in my face, like hit me up. I'm definitely down. It's always
we will facilitate any debate.
Yes.
There was one guy, you mentioned one guy that wanted to talk about Nietzsche. I'm not exactly equipped to do that, so I might say no, but if he did step up, I do really respect that, actually. But yeah, I'm just saying I'm down in general if I'm like qualified to.
Okay, well,
I think you and Uber Boyo would be a good stream. That'd be good content.
Yeah. Well, I think he may be watching this right now, so Uber Boyo. Oh, actually, no, I think Uber Boyo is dead set to do this, and I was actually wondering if you would be able to do this for the date.
Well, we would need someone who is like go ahead.
Well, Thursday, June 10th. This is the date. I know I think Uber Boyo can do this. So Owen, if you can do Thursday, June 10th, I can just put it right in there.
If he's on Twitter, add me into a group chat with him and we'll talk about
Absolutely. Let's we're going to figure that out.
I think I know some people who might be really into Nietzsche that could possibly get hooked up. So
And Glass Cake says, expose yourself to the uncomfortable and respond as you wish, just don't avoid it. Absolutely, I could not agree more. And Glass Cake is an amazing animator. I just want to do a shout out to James
Jay Dyer and Uber Boyo. That'd be interesting.
That would be interesting.
Wow, that'd be wow.
So here we go. James Cunningham, I just wanted to promote him over here. Glass Cake, fantastic animator, hell of a guy. So please follow Glass Cake as well. And guys, please follow over here. Owen Cyclops. I'd be surprised if you aren't following Owen. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody is. But just in case you're not, here is Owen's Twitter. And let's see.
And go to his buy his shirts and his prints.
Oh, yes.
That reminds me, I have to buy something from Owen. I have to buy some of his stickers.
Thanks, man.
Owen Cyclops Shopify. That is where you go to get all his stuff.
And I soon will have a shop set up too.
Yes,
by the way, Owen, how do you get your stickers made? If I ask you really quickly, how do you do that?
I order them from a company called Sticker Mule.
Oh, okay.
And I got to find a way to sell them like one by one, but that's kind of why I do them in packs. They're like here in boxes, and then I ship them out. Yeah.
I think the packs are like, I had this thing where I was gonna make stickers. I have like a bunch of eggshells, and I wanted to paint like these little Bob Ross landscapes on them. Maybe people might dig that. So.
And follow PinealColada on Twitter. She had to go, unfortunately, because her child was crying over there in the background, so she had to tend to that. But PinealColada with the hat, everybody loved her.
And go to her Etsy.
Yeah, go to her Etsy. Please go to her Etsy. And last but certainly not least, we have Porco Rosso flies again.
Yeah.
Oh, you also have an Etsy.
No, not yet. I have to. I'm starting up some shit. I'm gonna do Redbubble. I'm gonna start doing stickers. Actually, and we should have a sticker discussion.
Well, you can do. Well, you're a digital artist, so you could do the NFT shit. So that's.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm still really on the fence about that shit because, like, it really is bad for the environment. And it makes,
I'm not on the fence about it. Speaking of which, on Sunday we are going to have a live stream where it's going to be me, Gio, hopefully, and. Aiden Paladin.
I have to figure I might do a lino cut.
I'm actually familiar with already.
You want to come? You want to come on the
stream?
I
would love to.
Excellent. That's Sunday.
I might be
2
doing
PM.
a lino cut while Lev is finishing one of his NFTs. I'll do a lino cut. So
this is Aiden Paladin and Made a Nomad. Made a Nomad is coming in there. So
Wild really Things is actually a great movie, by the way. I love that movie. I think that was from the post. But Owen, would you do an NFT? Are you getting into that action, or you think it's all bullshit?
I'm definitely open to it. I think that the people saying that there's an environmental effect, that there's presumably some legitimacy to it. To be honest with you, I haven't looked into it that much because I kind of feel like crypto is like reparations for like internet nerds. Like now that all like now that all like everyone's forced to be online and I have to share the internet with like normal people, like I should be able to get rich off crypto as like repayment. But I haven't done it because I'm like, maybe I should think a little bit more seriously about it. So I haven't done it. But I really like the crypto stuff. So yeah, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do about that.
Maybe I should get into crypto and NFTs.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me. Yeah, it's unless I do something like I could do like a wood block where I only print off one and then I burn the wood. Some people do actually like burn or destroy their wood blocks or their linos because they want to. But that's like, to me, that's just artificial scarcity. I think that's a fucking gimmick, but I think that's kind of dishonest, I don't know. Unless the woodblock gets destroyed, which does happen like through printing. But I don't know. Artificial scarcity, it's kind of like the NFT things. It's just like the artist is now consenting to like this hyper, like, Nick Land capitalism that's going to go on. It's just
aren't people selling their souls through crypto as well? Isn't that going on?
Bart's soul. They're going to sell like Bart. Give it to Millhouse. The Millhouse sells it to some weirdo in a comic shop, and then he has to go to Capital City, and some fucking street cleaner tries to run him over. Do you remember that episode?
Man, it's been a while.
Dude, I know literally exactly what you're talking about. I actually have a book here that's all about like theology and The Simpsons, and I was like, I could rewrite this so much better. It's literally on my shelf right now.
Oh man. There's this great YouTuber, Dark Simpsons. I don't know if you know about him, Owen, but he look up Dark Simpsons. I actually he responds to every comment I make about me. He knows who I am, but his content's next level, put it that way. But I even feel like there's this whole like nostalgic mythology around like the early Simpsons and people like making edits and people doing like aesthetics
the hams, right?
Yeah, or like people doing like psychedelic Simpsons on Instagram or like cutscenes where it's just
what about
Simpsons,
that sugar
Simpsons?
like,
Well, the Simpsons,
Sugar Simpsons or whatever. It's like
it's like the stills of like without any characters in it. Like that shit's like the nostalgic factor.
Yeah, dude, you're talking about Scenic Simpsons? Yeah, it's so
Scenic
good.
Simpsons!
So good, dude.
Hold on one second.
Oh man.
I'll be right back.
It just hits you right in your heartstrings. There's something about that nostalgia. Just
Dude,
when I was a little girl, like I was terrified of The Simpsons. Like I thought it was like the scariest shit because I probably saw like a Treehouse of Horror episode.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like something really dark. And so like when like a couple years later, when I finally like watched a normal episode, I'm like, oh my god, this is really fucking funny. That was a nice moment, actually. That I think like freed up a lot of like my just spiritually, mentally. I'm like, oh wait, The Simpsons are great.
Yes, Buff, I do remember Pogs.
Alexandra, do you know what this is? This is not a Pog, but this is a dog.
It's a magnet. Is that a magnet? What is it?
So this is
one of your perks.
Yes,
this is our new definitely legit magnet.
Yes, definitely legit magnet. This is
our
definitely
good friend
legit.
Definitely Legit on Twitter.
Yeah, Alexandra, do you know about Definitely Legit?
What?
Do you know about Definitely Legit?
No, I don't.
Okay, I will show you in the chat right now. Hold on, Definitely Legit. So Definitely Legit
on Twitter.
He's a Russian guy, and he was part of the Kolyak community back in the day, and with Sunny and everybody. This is him. So first of all, what do you think of this avatar?
Sunny and everybody.
I can't
so here,
see.
You see the avatar? Nice, right?
Lassie.
It is Lassie, yeah. So so the magnet that I made, this is definitely legit wooden magnet. So this is for $20 pay. This is for $20 page.
I don't know why it's so funny.
Alexandra, can you do a shout out to Definitely Legit? Because I'm gonna send this to him.
Okay, hey, Definitely Legit. We're gonna send you a magnet.
No, we're not. This is not for him unless he becomes a patron. Definitely Legit. If you become a patron, we're gonna send you your own magnet, and if not, we're gonna send it to somebody else.
Oh my lord.
Yes, so this is for $20 Patreon patrons. $5 Patreon patrons become our percolators in our Discord server, the link to which I'm also going to post over here. So they are going to get access to the top secret parts of the Discord, as well as having the ability to post pictures inside of Discord. And $20, like I mentioned, they get the magnets. $30 are going to get the beautiful print from Geo, and here is the print in action right now. It is loading right now, guys. Be a little bit patient. The print is loading, and while I'm loading that print, I want to say that $50 patrons get all of the above, including a beautiful painting from Geo, including a beautiful figure that Jules created, including what else? Oh, and of course, including on top of this, they are also going to get a custom wooden magnet. Whatever they want, they're going to get. So that is what we're going to do for the patrons. Patreon.com/breaktherules. We are here. We are all the way live, and we love you, and we thank you for being here, and we highly respect you. I think the internet is going down for some reason. This is so weird. I wonder... Oh, no, now it's back. Never mind. We're still good. God. Yes, the stream did not die. Everything is good. No. Everything is fine. Anyway, yes, so I think we're going to end it right now because, yeah, the internet, something's... Okay, now it's back. I don't know. I wanted to showcase Geo's beautiful Patreon prints. Let me try it one more time, and I really appreciate everybody's patience.
Let's end the stream. I think Lev...
Oh, yeah, wait, before you do, I want everybody to look up R. Crumb Illustrates Philip K. Dick's Hallucinatory Spiritual Experience, because I think it's one of the best comic short stories.
Oh, yeah, the one by Crumb. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
I love that one.
And it's online. It's on this website called Brain Pickings. And so it's a super short read. It's so good, though, and it just kind of brings up pretty much so much of what we discussed in the chat and on the stream, and religion and spirituality and like sacred planes and like this and that. It's like it's great.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to showcase this not in the chat because it's not loading there, but I am going to showcase it on the screen so everybody sees it. Here it is. Geo's beautiful printmaking process. Look at him go. It is quite a sight to behold. There it is. That's from the TFW No GF series. So guys, become a patron today. We just got a $50 patron recently, and super chats. We got to send the super chats. I didn't say some of the super chats before because for reasons, but that the people who sent them know. But anyway, super chats from Prague. He gave $5 2 times, so that's $10. Thank you. No, he gave 2 more, so 5, 5, 2. That's 12. A total of $12 from Prague. One of the things that Prague wrote is imagine asking lab coats for spiritual verification. Thank you so much, Prague, for that. And what else we have here? James Cortidis. $5 to Super Chat. Just want to give my man Owen a shout out and props for the dope logo he did for me. Love you, bro.
Oh, word. Thanks, man.
Yeah, there we go. So, guys, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Keep subscribing to Break the Rules.
Love you
Watch.
all, even though
Love
Lev
you all.
hates you all.
Hey!
No.
I'm the good
Here's
parent,
the thing. Here's the
though.
thing. If I hated
love
you,
you.
I
hated
love
you,
everybody, especially the people who insulted me in the chat.
Called you a thought.
Especially those, yeah.
Oh,
That
we
was
got a lemon.
funny.
We got a lemon from standing while pooping. Standing while pooping.
I've never done that. Is that
Talk about
something
a
I
power
should try?
Standing while pooping.
Oh man, that is amazing. So yes.
I'm sorry.
So
Thank
are
you,
going to
standing
see,
while pooping.
Thank you, standing while pooping. And you guys are going to see the Bimbo Ubermensch thing show up right after we end the stream. So be sure to set a reminder for that. That is happening this coming Tuesday. Watch it. Be there. I appreciate all of you. And by the way, I love you maybe even more than Gio, because if I didn't love you, I wouldn't put pressure on you to get out of your echo chamber and grow stronger than you are already. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Exactly. Exit the goon cave of the mind. Because if you don't think you're in one, you're in one. So that's all.
So, God, thank you to all our great guests. Thank you, especially Owen Cyclops, Daniel Pinchbeck,
Take care.
and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
God
Daniel
bless.
was great. Take care.